Okay, so we left off on Monday with chapter 10. Chapter 10. And we've got a little bit more of that to cover. We'll go on in chronologically into chapter 11, of course. We've got some things to talk about because I want to revisit the syllabus. I hope you are still using that as a main reference, a main study guide. Don't forget that syllabus. And let's take a look. Here we go. What we have on the right, obviously, is the syllabus, and then on the left is some forms. We're going to be looking at those forms in a little bit. Get rid of the forms for now. Here's that syllabus. So this is one of those sections in the syllabus. I'm sure you've realized by now, some of them have more content than others. All of them have the topics you need, but some of them actually have definitions and sort of answers and more elaboration than others do. Obviously, section 10, chapter 10 in the book, around 7.5 hours of coverage time that we need to spend, and that's going to pretty much be accurate by the time we're done here in a minute. So from section A, right? The importance of the contract. It sets the parameters. It informs the deed. We just work our way on through. And if you haven't discovered this yet, the blue links in the online version, if you click on those, they're going to take you straight to that document too. So when I just clicked that, it took me in my browser to drafting legal instruments, because all these things are cross-referenced and available on Google. So that's kind of useful. If you're reviewing the syllabus online, you might have one printed that you're going by and writing notes on, but then don't forget the online version can be useful so you don't have to go digging. Isn't that nice not to have to go digging around in 93A and commission rule? And I did it again on that one, and it came right up, the disciplinary actions by the commission. Here's my favorite, by the way. Speaking of this, it says, Commission has the power to suspend or revoke at any time a license or to reprimand or censure if, following the hearing, they judge the licensee to be guilty of. All of these scary things. And the last one, number 15, violating any rule adopted by the commission. So they just kind of throw that umbrella term right in there and get you with, if they get you with all these other things or one or two of these, then this one will oftentimes be included in the mix too. So it's nice to just be able to click and go right to it, especially if you don't have much time studying. You don't want to be flipping around through some stuff. It doesn't matter where it's located as long as you can find it, right? And it's good to be reading through the comments section. Hopefully that's happened for you at least a few times. But also, the commission wants you to be familiar with the license law section and the commission rules section itself too. And that's just a quick, easy way to do so. Here's one of the many warnings that we've given because they tell us to. We don't do legal stuff. We don't do legal language. We don't draft language. We have attorneys do that in real life. If the client ventures into some question about anything remotely legal, we defer that. Yes, okay, whatever you know about it, you could share with them, but not in the form of legal advice. You'd say, well, here's what that means, but as to what you should do, let me connect you with a good attorney. And the longer you're in the business, the more you're going to meet various vendors, inspectors, appraisers, surveyors, attorneys, and you'll reuse the good ones. You might try out some based on recommendations of other agents, and then you'll not like some because maybe one attorney didn't spend as much time as you would have liked them to explaining things to your client, and you kind of had to jump in along the way. Some attorneys are just wired that way. They're just trying to get through it because they have 20 more today. But you need to be the voice for your client. And as you're sitting there very politely, but sometimes kind of firmly, and make them stop, because the client doesn't know what they don't know, right? And if that attorney says, well, here's what this means, sign here. Does that make sense? Sometimes because the client is also thinking about getting that moving truck emptied, getting the keys. Is it going to all work? Are the kids okay? All kinds of stuff. It is up to you to bring that down, kind of get that nice and mellow and kind of own the room without being a egotistical jerk, but kind of very from the back seat say, hey, okay, yeah, it looks like there might be a question here. Let's talk more about this issue. There's a lot of documents, and those attorneys have explained them and know them upside down and backwards, but your client doesn't. And so it doesn't mean you need to know it either. You're not expected to have to explain every single one. You just need to be watching. I like to watch my clients' faces and eyes while we're doing this whole thing. I'm watching the attorney. I'm looking at what's next. I'm watching them. If I see confusion, frowning, kind of looking from one to the other, if it's a couple, I'm stopping. Oh, did that make sense? And then sometimes if the attorney's not doing a great job explaining, they don't seem interested in doing so, and I know the issue, I'll say, well, okay, this means such and so on and so forth. Is that correct? Would you agree? Bring them in, right? So it is up to us to kind of set the tone, the mood of the meeting. That is not commission sponsored information. That is just real world information. The same way as in the back and forth negotiating of the counteroffers, don't ever let the emotions of your client become yours. So many times I've had an agent on the other side who clearly the client is kind of riffing off of that agent. The agent is the one with the emotional reaction. The client is just mirroring it. We are there as buffers to be the professional. It doesn't matter how outlandish the claim or the requirement or the counter or the statement is from one party to the next. Let's be the one who calms the storm and because nobody benefits usually from a failed closing. If they do, if it's in your client's best interest for this closing not to happen, that's its own thing, and that could be the case. For the most part, everybody still wants to do it. They're just kind of mad about some issue along the way. It doesn't help if the agents gang up and get emotional alongside them. Residential especially is very emotion-based, as it should be, as you would expect it to be. So we need to be the professional. And you'd be surprised how many agents don't act that way. Part of it is an ego problem. They think, well, I can add value to this and posture myself to be a big deal if I really hammer down on this other agent in front of my client. And they'll do the same thing at a new construction model home. They'll really kind of flex on new home sales consultant, and it doesn't serve any purpose except their own little self moment of glory, which is a flash in the pan. What I like to do instead in a new construction model is say, you know what? You know the product better than I ever could. You're here every day. I'm going to sit here and let you just kind of tell them what you'd like to tell them. What do we need to know about your product and what makes it unique? And I will jump in along the way, but very respectfully. And then I'll just be quiet for a minute. But if they go into like mega sales mode and it looks like they're trying to take our time and turn this into a 5-hour meeting and we have other houses to see, that's when you step in again and you take control. Okay, would you agree, client, that we have a pretty good feel for what's going on here? Okay, we do have an appointment coming up. We need to move on, but I really appreciate your time. Right? Isn't that so much better than, tell me what this place has because we don't see anything great right now. People act all kinds of ways. I'm trying to make one agent at a time a little different when we run across that kind of attitude, because it doesn't help anybody. As we go down through, let's see, here it is. Realtors may obtain and use the forms that were written by the realtor organization in conjunction with the NC Bar. That is who can use those forms. It's right here in the syllabus. I'm sure you've seen it already. Non-realtor brokers may not. There are some agents out there who do not join the Realtor Association. Not many, because there's a lot of benefits, and in fact, most firms require them to. If the firm is a member, the people within the firm, brokers within the firm have to be. But some do save that money around 2008, 9, 10, when agents were not doing great, but deals were falling apart. that is one way some agents saved money. They went out on their own. They gave up their realtor membership and they just tried to make do. But it's kind of hard to do anything in this business because it kind of goes hand in hand with the MLS access and all that stuff. But that's the kind of person we're talking about. A non-realtor, they might have given up their realtor membership and then they try to go use a form because they still have them, right? But that's not allowed. They're no longer a realtor member, can't use the form. And then another common way that could be is that you, in trying to win over the for sale by owner, give them a little stack of forms that are useful. One would be a copy of the sales contract. And if it's this one without the word sample written across it, which would allow them to use it, that would be a mistake. If that unrepresented seller sells to an unrepresented buyer and there's no realtor in the transaction, they can't use the form. Most of those forms, and we're going to look at several of the addenda today. We're going to dig into the addenda. We're going to dig into the contract more. Now that you've learned the ins and outs, we're going to go see them in action, so to speak. But there are 3 documents that we use quite a bit that are not provided by the Realtor Association, the Realtor organization. They are provided by the Real Estate Commission, of all places. They don't give us much in the way of forms, but these forms are crucial, and they are the ultimate source. You still can get them through your realtor membership, but they originated from the commission. And those are the one we've already talked about, the Working with Agents disclosure and the questions and answers brochure, the Residential Property Owners Association Disclosure Statement, RPODS. That's the main disclosure that is required when selling residential real estate, with a few exemptions. There's a few cases where you do not have to provide this disclosure, where the seller does not have to provide it. But for the most part, except for those exemptions, they have to provide it, even if a realtor's not involved. I've had agents get this wrong. I had a buyer want to buy a for sale by owner. They found them themselves. They heard about it, drove past it or something. They called me and said, I want to check into this house. And I'm always a little leery when they want to check on a for sale by owner, because I don't know what I'm going to be dealing with. Is that person going to be agreeable to paying a buyer agency fee? Would they pay me 3%? Because that's what I choose to charge. Do they think agents are just scumbags and that's why they're not doing it? Then I just have to break down some barriers, right? This particular FSBO was an agent herself, actively working agent herself. So I'll just let you fill in the blanks as to how pleasant that experience was. She was a little frustrated about the process, and there were probably 6 things that she said in our conversation that I could have probably turned her in over. One of them was, she didn't say this to me. She said this to my client when I wasn't there. They told her about me, like they should. And she said, oh, well, you don't need that agent. You can just use me because I'm an agent and it's just quicker and easier that way. Okay, so she just tried to solicit another agent's client. She tried to encourage them to not have their own equal representation because she cannot be a buyer's agent because it's her own house, right? I think she might have even mentioned dual agency in there. She also said things like this. When I did talk to her on the phone, she said, well, I don't have to provide that residential property disclosure because I'm for sale by owner. And I'm like, no, that's not true. And she argued with me about it. And she was her own broker owner too, which is always interesting when, yikes, she might even have a few people under her and she's going off of who knows where she pulled that information. They still need to provide this disclosure, this specific one. Now, don't forget, this is that 4-page one that has 3 columns of check marks. Is there a problem? Check yes. Is there not a problem? Check no. But it also says, I'm not telling if there's a problem or not. I'm going to check no representation. She, as a broker owner, would not be able to hide behind no representation. That's the other thing. We are held to a higher standard as owners of our own property and brokers selling our own property. Therefore, it's probably why she was claiming she didn't need to provide it, because she knew she couldn't hide behind no representation like an average seller who is not licensed, right? she would have to disclose normal things that a broker would have to disclose because she's both. She does not get the privilege of owner disclosure rules. And then this other thing that we'll look at today, something called the mineral oil and gas disclosure. I mentioned it once before, and I think I told you about that builder that was at one point selling the rights for people to mine for one or all three, some of these things, minerals, oil or gas, under the new construction properties that they were selling, until people got wind of it, found it in the contract. They were disclosing it in the contract, but people were kind of just not noticing it for a while. And then they kind of made a big fuss about it. That builder stopped doing it. They said, okay, we won't do this, at least in North Carolina, as far as I know. And shortly thereafter, this thing emerged. You know, when things come and people get frustrated and maybe even lawsuits start popping up, they put out a form. Back when, once upon a time, everything seems new to me at this point, but once upon a time, there was an agent in South Charlotte, South Park, and she was with a pretty big company. She was a major agent. She did a lot of business, but she clicked on a link in an email. She got an email from a bad guy. It looked authentic. She clicked on the link, and you know what happens next. They see everything on your computer, right? Because it was a straight up scammer kind of a person. You ever watch those scammer videos on YouTube when they actually scam the scammer? I love those. But this happened, and that bad guy, wherever they were located, who knows, could be anywhere in the world, they saw that she had an upcoming closing where her buyer needed to wire $60,000 to the closing attorney. And that person, that bad guy, made up a fake email, made a fake, I forgot the word, but it looked like letterhead, for that attorney, and sent that client of hers, because they accessed the client's info through her email account, and told them, look, I know we sent you the wiring instructions for your upcoming closing to send us the $60,000. I know we sent you that last week, but that has changed. We've changed the account. Please send it to this wiring information, not what we sent you last week. And they did it. 60,000 wired to the bad guys. Now, good news for her, or for those people. They immediately felt something weird in the back of their mind. As soon as they hit send, wire it, and they called their agent, the agent said, okay, let me check with the attorney real quick. And the attorney said, no, we haven't changed anything. And they got to it quickly and fast enough that they could undo and reverse the wire, because the bad guy wasn't there to take the money yet. They had obviously been too busy scamming other people and didn't get around to that one right away. So they were lucky. But obviously everybody realized, oh my gosh, this could have been bad. Number one, the client could have lost $60,000. Number two, they could have easily had grounds to sue the agent and their company. So the agent, their company, the whole industry, because it wasn't just this occurrence. There have been several others where the person didn't have time to back it out and lost, I heard, like $90,000 in one case. Fraudulent wiring. It changed the industry. It added not one of these, but it added a new addendum called the wire fraud addendum. And there for a year or so, we were expected to use that. And I don't think anybody used it because we had so many other papers to use. I think it kind of fell by the wayside, because then a year or two later, I noticed they got rid of the addendum and took the guts of it and inserted it in the forms that we do use a lot. So you'll see the last page, or one of the last 3 pages of the contract, has a big red box called the wire fraud addendum, so that we go over with our client. Look, guys, here it is. Here's the warning in that. I will never be the middle person. Don't give me sensitive information, especially by email. If the attorney needs your social security number, for instance, I'm going to give you advice to go ahead and contact them directly at a phone number you obtained for them yourself. Don't even rely on me to get the right number, right? Let's make sure we distance ourselves from the possibility of infecting them with a virus that we might have accidentally clicked on and gotten in our system, right? So that wire fraud thing became just a normal box within many of the other forms. we keep on going. Here's those reference to those 19 items that have to be in a pre-printed form. You don't have to know what they are, but they're in there. You have access to them. And just to prove it to you, not that you're calling me a liar, but here they are. I clicked on the blue link and there they are. Names of buyer and seller. Some of this stuff is a nice little review because we know that some of this stuff has been what we've covered. Legal description. We saw that. That needs to be in the contract. Purchase price, manner of payment. What else? Earnest money. Is there going to be a loan? Item 8 right there. Sorry, I know I'm kind of uneven here. There we go. Special assessments, date of offer and acceptance, signatures of both parties, when it's going to date for closing and transfer of possession. Interesting they use the word closing because it really is what we have in there is settlement. So there they are, 20. And they gave us a nice umbrella item. Any other provision or disclosure required by statute or rule. So that just kind of gives it some flexibility, I suppose. So, by the way, if you've just joined us, we are reviewing the syllabus for Chapter 10, for Section 10, just as a reminder to keep using that in your studies and pointing out that some things in here give you more. So, like you get to hear brokerage compensation and liability disclaimer are the two prohibited provisions. Can't have these in the contract. Contract may not include these things. You can't say, I might be terrible at this, so you won't hold me accountable. Can't be in the contract. You just have to have reasonable skill and care, right? And then you can't say, well, my buyer will buy this property at this price as long as you pay me 5% commission. That's not allowed either. Can't negotiate your compensation within the contract. What would you use? How would you go about as a broker negotiating your compensation? If you can't put it in the contract, how would you do it? Tell me in the chat. Yeah, there you go, Ashley. Yeah. An agency contract, an agency agreement. And the buyer agency one says specifically, bottom of the first page, look, guys, I'm going to try to get paid through the seller, as is the custom. But if the seller won't pay me either at all or enough to satisfy me, because I charge a certain amount, then you, the buyer, will make up the difference. Now, whether the buyer goes along with that, usually they do because they don't really think about it. Some agents are not great at explaining what that really means. But it also might be that if it does come down to the seller paying only, say, 1.5%, and that agent works for at least 2.5%, is the agent ever really going to demand it? Maybe not. They might say, and they might have a buyer agency agreement giving them permission with full disclosure, and the buyer signed it, but they don't really want to have the conversation. They maybe don't want to hold out and ask for that extra 1%, perhaps, because this business is it's a numbers game. And some agents get real caught up in each individual transaction and squeezing every dime out of every one. But there's a lot to be said for the relationship. And you've got to make that judgment call. Is this going to harm your relationship with them? Or are they going to be done with you after this and you may not care? Look, give me my money. Or they are the source of 4 other transactions in the last 3 years because they're great at referring business to you. And so maybe that is to be rewarded. And maybe this pops up and you're like, you know what? I know it's several $1,000s. It's a lot of money, but they are a great repeat and referral client. And they're sort of on my unofficial platinum club, so to speak, right? A lot of these things are business decisions. Nothing right or wrong, just the way you choose to do it. Some agents are going to do it differently. We go on down, we're going to go into the forms and finish that out today. You notice the required activity here is to go over the offer to purchase and contract and the most common addenda that are used and have a detailed review of each. So we've already done some of that. We're going to make sure we finish that up. Proper use of the offer to purchase form. And for existing single family, there's another one. That standard form 2T is for single family residences. That also includes condos and townhouses. You can use it for that. What you don't use it for is land. Land has its own offer to purchase. That one's actually called 12T, not that you need to know the number. But that could be a test question. There's a separate one for houses. There's a different one for land. And then you use the basic addenda to tailor to the needs of the parties. Add to the offer as the client requires. Whatever the conditions and terms they want to add into the offer are, find the form for that and apply it and include it. We do not have a standard form for any of these three things. We don't have a standard form for a lease option situation, like you're renting and then you have the option to purchase, or it could be called a lease purchase agreement, or what's called an installment land contract. Do you remember what that is? I think we might have mentioned it. That's okay. Good to see you, Darnell. What is an installment land contract? You could use two words to define it. Installment land contract. Sounds really big and important and crazy, but it's just basically seller financing. That's all it is. The seller is the bank as well as the seller, meaning they're selling it, but they're also financing it. The buyer does not have to go out and get their own financing because the seller is going to let them, instead of giving them the full $500,000, they're going to let them make them payments along the way. That seller might require that they give them a down payment. They might say, I'm not going to let you just start paying me $2,000 a month for the next 30 years without giving me like $5,000 down, right? But essentially whatever the lender bank does is what the seller's going to do. How the seller, they're going to establish what the duration is. Is it a 30-year loan, 20-year, 10-year? They're going to establish the interest rate. What interest rate are we going to base your payment off of? We'll get into that today. At what rate? How much am I going to charge you for borrowing this money? That's what the seller's saying. So how many payments? What's the interest rate? How long will I give you to, that's the same as how many payments, how long will you have to pay it off? And what happens if you don't? What happens if you're late? It's much more involved than just a contract, right? It's the deed of trust too, or the mortgage, another word, we could call it a mortgage. So therefore it's highly complicated and highly customized to the needs of the individual parties of that transaction. Therefore, let's keep our hands off of it. There is no fill in the blank form for such a thing. You need to get an attorney to draft a contract needed in a seller financing deal. And an installment land contract needs to be drawn up by an attorney with these specifics in mind. This buyer, this seller, this property. So again, I think I kind of got off on a rabbit trail a minute ago. You're going to meet and work with a lot of attorneys. Get the good ones in your pocket. Always, probably use the same couple. And that way they'll realize eventually, oh, she sends us a lot of business. She brings her clients here a lot. So if you need something like this real quick for your client, or even just a stock one, just to show them what it looks like, call up that attorney, email that paralegal that you work with a lot. And by the way, the paralegal is your best friend. The attorney, they're okay, but the paralegal is the one you're going to be interacting with. So therefore, buddy up. Be nice, be sweet, be useful and helpful. Don't take it out on them. Those people that tip poorly and take it out on the front desk clerks and that whole thing in life, don't be that way with the paralegal. That's the person that can get an answer out of the attorney real quick for you. You're not going to be able to reach that attorney if you have a client question. You're going to need to reach out to the paralegal and say, hey, would you mind checking with Kevin and asking if this, such and so forth, I just need a quick answer for my client. And if you did it right, and if they're cool and you're cool, they'll send you an email back within a little bit and you'll get a quick free piece of legal advice that might help your client just move on and make a decision, right? These are all going to be in my upcoming course, How to Survive Your First Year. Would you like a course like that? Seriously, that'd be useful. Item by item review of all the provisions. Okay, we talked about most of this. Print type legibly. Make sure it's legible. Don't get messy. And that's it's not as common to handwrite contracts anymore, offers anymore. We're using the computers quite a bit more, so the legibility thing is not so much an issue. But what is still an issue is filling in all the blanks. Some of the softwares, if you put in like a 0, it'll just not put anything into blank. And I always get nervous when I have an offer come across my desk that has a blank that's still a blank. Because I'm thinking, well, we could sign it and then somebody could fill that blank in later and it looks like we signed off on that too. That's the reason for doing this. Let's fill in the blanks with none or NA if it's nothing we need to use. Be precise. Any sort of ambiguity is going to be ruled against the one who wrote the ambiguous entry or language. And then both buyer and seller should initial and date every single change, addition, or deletion. During the counteroffers, going to go back and forth, and if there's a change on the contract, it needs to be struck through and initialed and dated by all the parties to the transaction to make sure they're all acknowledging that they are going along with this change, right? It could be that you are literally sending that paperwork back and forth with every counter, and every time they're maybe printing it off or docu-signing it and striking through the change and putting in their initials and dates. And then by the time you're done with five counteroffers and get to an acceptance, you've got this whole string of changes and it's all messed up and cluttery. The commission doesn't like that either because that leads to ambiguity and lack of clarity. So what we usually do is figure out the back and forth, and then we make a nice, crispy, clean contract without any strike-throughs and initials and dates. No need for them because we worked all that out. Now we hurry up and fill it in as if it were right from the start, as if the resulting conclusion between the parties from that fifth counter is what our idea was in the beginning, and we just put it all nice and perfectly lined up. No really strike-through showing anymore. But if there are, they need to be dated and initialed. And there it is. I just stole my thunder again. Rewrite the offers if there's numerous changes. Retain copies of all offers. And now that's another one. We have to retain things for how long? How long do we need to keep our files on any given transaction? We brokers and firms. 3 years. Thank you. Well, that stands for all 14 of the counteroffers back and forth, including the final agreed upon. All of them, right? Probably a good idea to go electronic with your file maintenance, right? Review all contract provisions with the parties. Recommend that they get legal advice for legal questions. This is great, right? In the syllabus, I mean, it's useful. It's all that stuff we've covered in the textbook and in the slides, just all distilled into this document. They make a reference here about if a term is not normally capitalized, if it appears in the body, it's saying that it's a defined term that can be found somewhere earlier in the contract because they've acknowledged that this is what we're going to call this thing from here forward. We don't want to have to draw out this whole long explanation every time, but so if it's got something with a capital letter in the beginning that normally would not need to be capitalized, that's why it's there. This box is something we talked about last time. Scenarios to explore how initial and additional types of earnest money should be handled and when it should be delivered to the escrow agents at various points during the transaction. So what are the two options if we choose initial earnest money? If we choose to fill in the blank with say it's $2,000 for earnest money like the old days, if we choose to use initial earnest money instead of additional, when do we need to give it to the custodian of the trust account? There's two options, either this or that if it's initial. Do you remember? One, yeah, there we go, Shane. What is the name of that? same day as the start of the contract. What's another word for that, by the way? It's an E word. Some kind of date. There we go. Yeah. Effective date is one option. So when we use initial earnest money, it needs to be given to the brokerage or the attorney that's going to hold it in their trust account on the effective date if we check that box. If we don't want to give it immediately on the effective date, there's another alternative option, and that is within 5 days of the effective date. So it's either effective date or within 5 days of it. Check the box accordingly. But what's the downside of having earnest money in a trust account? Do you remember I call it the seller holding it hostage? What am I talking about there? The seller can hold that earnest money hostage. If it's already in the system, so to speak, it's held in somebody's trust account, and then the buyer exercises their legal right to back out during the due diligence period. And in the contract and everywhere else, it says if the buyer backs out during due diligence period, we're going to give them their earnest money back. But that seller could say, you know what? I don't agree. I'm not signing the release form. And that attorney holding it in their trust account or that broker holding it in their trust account, they can't make a judgment call and give it away anyway. They can't give it away, even though they like the other party better or they think that seller's a jerk. It doesn't matter. The seller must sign the termination before they can take it out of the account and give it back to the buyer. And so basically the parties have to agree in writing if there's a dispute over the earnest money. There it is. Thank you, Twee. It needs to be signed by both. Both parties need to agree what's going to happen to this earnest money when this deal falls through because the buyer chose to back out, which they're allowed to do. Well, the seller can't refuse to sign a release for money that's not in existence, right? They can't hold that earnest money hostage if there is none that has been turned in yet. So a legal and according to the rules method of taking this power away from this seller, like this kind of scary nightmare bad guy seller, so to speak, would be to not give the earnest money yet and therefore don't use initial earnest money, but instead only use additional earnest money because that lets you choose the date that you're going to turn it in. Now, the parties have to agree, but usually they're not thinking this far ahead. The other party, even if that's some kind of a savvy seller that's all wheeling and dealing and looking for the loopholes and the angles, they're probably not thinking that far ahead, and they'll usually just agree. Oh, okay, you're going to turn the earnest money later, like the day before due diligence deadline ends or the day of due diligence. And that way, if that buyer chooses to back out because they didn't like the way the inspection report came out and the seller refused to fix things, so the buyer's like, well, forget this. Seller won't fix these items. It's like $8,000 worth of things needing fixed. And you know what? I'm just going to walk away. The seller were to say, well, then you don't get your earnest money back. The buyer's agent could say to the listing agent, well, there is none because we didn't turn it in yet because we didn't have to until tomorrow. And we're backing out today. How about that? So don't let the words initial versus additional throw you. It doesn't mean you have to give them some money up front initially, and then you're going to give them some more money later. Has nothing to do with that at all. You could do it that way if you wanted to give them some. You might want to give them some in the beginning just to get their attention, but not all of it because you want to reward them by picking your offer, right? If you're up against multiples, you might say, well, we're going to give you this amount up front and then we'll give you some more later. But it doesn't have to be used that way. The escrow agent can eventually, in a dispute situation, tell both parties, look, you have an amount of time. If you don't agree as to how this money is going to be dispersed on this dead deal, I'm going to turn it over to the clerk of court, and then they will handle it from there. And it'll be out of my account, and I don't have to balance my account with this waste of money in it because it doesn't serve me any purpose. I'm never getting paid off of this anymore. Therefore, except for maybe a little piddly amount of interest that they might gain on it being in their account. Settlement does not have time is of the essence, and they're giving a warning that brokers probably should not include it because it's such a likelihood that it could get bumped. In fact, if you write that in as a broker, what they're saying on this last line is you just possibly engaged in practicing law. That's the kind of language you're not allowed to write. So to write that in the, let's see, I might have it close by. There it is. Good. To write that in here where we have settlement date. There it is. If we write that in there to settlement date, that would be wrong. That'd be practicing law without a license. Now, if your party wanted it done, if your buyer wanted it done or the seller, they could do it, or better yet, have the attorney do it. Call that paralegal again and say, I hate to bother you with this, but I can't do it. I'm not an attorney. And I'd rather you the attorney give their opinion and them execute it. Therefore, could they make this adaptation to this for me? Sometimes they have stock addenda that aren't available to us, that they're not given to us as a standard form. So the attorney will provide that to you. But we would not want to write time is of the essence in here. Certainly not ourselves. We talked about how closing is not necessarily going to be on the same date as settlement. It's usually not a happy day when that happens. And then we'll make our way through the contract and look at these items individually in a moment. By the way, about the due diligence process, what are we doing during due diligence? What is it that needs to happen? Are we celebrating with champagne when we go under contract? Maybe. I'm not, because I'll celebrate when my check is in my hand after closing, right? But some do. Okay, you do you. But what are we still doing? A whole lot. What sorts of things does that buyer want to do? Thank you. Make sure the financing is going to go through as best you can. Inspections, obviously. The closing attorney will do the title search, searching for liens. Thank you, Danita. What other things besides inspections? There it is. Yep, survey. Big one that a lot of people overlook or they don't want to spend the money on because they've already spent so much money on other things. Appraisal. When they applied for the loan, they had to probably pay an appraisal fee to the lender so they could pass it on over to the appraiser and pay for that up front. Human nature is funny. They have an inspection on a property. They get the report back. That inspector does everything they're supposed to do. They crawl around that nasty crawl space, get bit by snakes and find the dead bodies and write up the report, and they put in several hours of time. And then the deal falls through, or the buyer decides to walk away because of what they saw in the inspection maybe. And maybe they choose not to pay for the inspection because it's kind of insult to injury. They're like, gosh, I don't even get the house. Why should I pay? Some people are like that. Obviously, that would be the wrong move. Because of that, inspectors have changed the way they do business, and very few of them will release the report without getting paid first. And they used to allow the buyer to pay them at closing from the closing day, which helped a lot with buyers that needed help financially. There are buyers that are getting no money down financing. They don't have a lot of cash to work with. So it was useful to not have to pay any of the bills until closing day when you're bringing the money and that lender has given you that big check. But a lot of them won't do it, or they'll charge more for the inspection if you pay later. Yeah, you got it. That's why they got stiffed. So point here is buyers need to do whatever they need to do to decide if they're going to move forward to closing. Do it early. Get it done within the due diligence period. Don't wait, because the process of the appraisal can take a while. Just because sometimes the lender doesn't even order it for a week or two because maybe they're waiting for you to do the inspections or hire the inspectors. I look at each deal individually because it might be that we're more worried about the appraisal than we are about the inspection. If we're more worried that the house is not worth what we've agreed to pay for it than we are to make sure the roof leaks because it's in good shape, then I want to go ahead and knock out that appraisal first. Because if you order the appraisal, it might take as much as a week or so before they even go out there. And once the appraiser goes out there, they're not done. They don't just issue the valuation right on the spot. They go back to the office, they put pen to paper, and they do their little calculations, and that could take a while because they're all busy too. It could be a 2 or 3 week turnaround between ordering it and getting the number back. And then once they do give an appraised value, the lender might not like it. Might say, well, this isn't enough to go on. This is a little too close for us to make a judgment on giving them a loan. Therefore, can you give us a few more comparable properties to look at? Mr. Appraiser, can you show us a little more proof as to why you think it's worth this? Because we're not seeing it. We're not convinced. They can't, and they have to run this through proper channels. They can't reach out and talk to the appraiser directly either, because so much fraud happened back in leading up to 2008. So all those things are done during due diligence. Anything. Buyer can back out for any reason or no reason. We covered this. There's no financing or appraisal contingencies in the contract. Just need to make sure that you have, what I tell buyers is, don't take offense to the process of the loan approval. They're going to make you feel like a criminal. They're going to make you feel like you have a 2 credit score, 2.0 credit score. That's just the way it is. So even if you have 800 golden credit, you're still going to have to jump through the hoops. And I go ahead because so many things in this business, if you prepare them for the pain in the butt it's going to be later, it's a little easier for them. Tell them now, so when that happens, they're like, oh yeah, she did tell me that could happen. It goes so much easier. So tell them they're going to ask you for documents. You're going to send those documents. Send them right away. Hopefully you can get them to pull them out of the shoebox in the guest room, or however you do your paperwork. I hope it's better than that. Give it to them. But it might be the week after they call you again and want the same thing again. I know it's annoying. I know it's frustrating, but that's just sort of the way it can go. Get it back to them ASAP, right? It's the golden rule. He who has the gold makes the rules. You want to borrow 6 figures or more from this institution, we got to kind of play by their rules, do what they ask us to do, and send them documents even though you already sent them. It's going to be a waste of time to argue with them and say, well, I already sent that. Why didn't you keep track of it? You know what? Do or don't. Do you want the money? Kind of what it comes back around to. Okay, let's see here. Let's go ahead and take our break, and when we come back, we'll finish up with 10, and we'll go over some documentation, some of these addenda. Let's come back right at 10. Welcome back. All right. Let's see where we left off. Somewhere right about here, I think. First of all, let's do a little bit of a review. Well, let's check a sample test problem. On Wednesday, sellers communicate through their agent that they have accepted and signed the offer to purchase. Sellers informed the buyer that they mailed the contract to the buyer's home address. The earnest money deposit was to be delivered within 3 days of acceptance. On Thursday, the sellers changed their mind about selling the house. The paperwork has not arrived yet at the buyer's home address, and the earnest money has not yet been received. Sellers emailed the buyer to let them know that and these are the agents who are talking back and forth, by the way, let them know that the sellers have changed their mind and instructed the buyer to destroy the signed offer to purchase when it arrives. Which of the following is true for the sellers? May they unilaterally terminate because each party has a 5-day right of rescission? May they unilaterally terminate because the contract is not valid until the earnest money is received? Unilaterally terminate means one of them can say it's over without the other's authority or permission. May not unilaterally terminate because a binding sales contract exists, or D, may not unilaterally terminate because the buyer has not been given the full 3 days to deliver the earnest money. Any ideas? Any more? Get some answers from everybody. You guys are good. As usual, no, we have a contract. It does not matter that they don't have it in hand. The mailbox rule covers that. It was officially considered having been delivered the minute it got out of the seller's possession and into the possession of the postal service. So there's that. The money has nothing to do with it. And that sounds weird. The money doesn't have anything to do with whether it's under contract or not. It's about acceptance and communication of that acceptance, right? It could even be this. We've agreed. Let me think. We've got a contract. We've agreed. It's accepted. It's been communicated. And I'm the buyer agent, and I meet the listing agent in the parking lot at McDonald's because I'm going to give them the due diligence check to take to their seller. The earnest money check, we're just going to let the attorney hold that. So I don't need to give that to them. I'm going to take it by the attorney's office in a minute. But I go ahead and give them, the listing agent in the parking lot, the check for due diligence money, and they are going to deliver it immediately to their seller. They pull out of the parking lot. They're driving down the road. My buyer calls me and says, I've had a change of heart. I want out of the contract. Bring me my due diligence money back. I want my money back. Bring me the due diligence check. Obviously, what am I going to tell them as far as the contract and whether or not they can back out of it? Can a buyer back out of a contract? Can they choose to back out for any reason or no reason? So they can back out. So it's not a question of can they, but here's the real question. What about the money? That agent right now is driving away. I can still see the car. They have not turned it over to the seller yet. I can call that listing agent and say, wait a minute, my buyer just called me. He wants his due diligence money back. And she still has the time and ability to turn her car around and drive it back to me and give me the check back and me take it back to my buyer. Is that what we do? Don't you love it? It's like, oh my gosh, knock on wood, may we never have to deal with this. So the commission's opinion on this is, yes, the buyer has the ability to back out, right? They can back out for any reason or no reason. When I call that listing agent and tell her he wants it back, turn around and bring it, she might not really know either. He or she may be like, well, it's already in my possession. I'm going to bring it to my seller. They get it. That's the whole point of due diligence money is the buyer backs out. They should lose the due diligence money. And you're telling me to bring back this only little bit of leverage that we have? Yeah, I am. Not because I want you to, but because my buyer demanded it. It's still their money. And it's still their right to tell us to give it back. Yes, the seller can then go after them and say, you were supposed to give me this due diligence money, but that is out of our hands. We just have to do what we have to do with the paperwork and the money as directed by the parties. We are not enforcers. Isn't that weird? Isn't that hard to kind of... Now, all the more reason to hurry up and get due diligence money to the seller ASAP. Now, that's an extreme example. What about this more common example? The agents, we've got a contract. The due diligence money is not turned over to the seller yet. And let's say everybody signed off on everything at 10 o'clock last night. And the agent said, you know what? We're both tired. Let's just meet up in the morning and we will exchange. I'll get you the due diligence money. You can take it to your seller. And then the morning rolls around and you know what? You've got clients. You've got the next client to work with and they do too. That agent's busy too. And so you both are like, you know what? Can we just do this tomorrow? And you let it drag out and you don't get that due diligence money into the seller's possession. And you're planning to go ahead and do it tomorrow because you're both busy agents. You're kind of a big deal. But then this afternoon, your buyer demands it back. And the seller's like, wait, okay, the buyer can back out. I understand this, but my comfort zone of them backing out is that I get that due diligence money. So where is it? That's the more real scenario. Agents getting slack, getting slow in delivering it. Now it's on the agent. Now people are mad at them. Now complaint buttons get pushed on the real estate commission website. Complaints get made. So that's why I say the priority when it's surrounding a contract and the money, ASAP, first priority above all else. Don't make 3 hours of cold calls to try to get your next deal. Don't go celebrate at lunch yet. Let's make sure we button it all up, get it locked down, not only under contract, but the money in the seller's hands so that there's some leverage for the buyer to lose if they walk away. Yeah. Now, again, we're not the enforcers. So just have to make sure you expedite this stuff quickly. And then sometimes the buyer agent will call you, the listing agent, and say, we're just going to mail the due diligence money. And I'm always nervous when we're mailing due diligence money because the mailbox rule does not apply to the money. Just because we put it in the big blue box out in front of the post office, doesn't mean that it's now considered in the hands of the seller because it's all about, is it really physically? So that doesn't apply. I just don't like, once people make a decision, let's get it locked down. We don't want to have to navigate through those awkward situations. A lot easier for a buyer to walk away if there's no money to be lost in walking away. And now your seller gave up other buyers' offers to take this one, and this one ended up without them even getting any due diligence money, right? Let's look at this one. A buyer agent submits a written offer to purchase on behalf of their buyer client. The listing agent presents it to the seller. Seller signs it without making any changes. As the seller is signing it, the buyer agent calls and withdraws the buyer's offer at the request of the buyer. Which of the following is true? Seller's in the middle of signing it when the buyer agent calls and withdraws the offer because the buyer told him to. Okay. Offer to purchase was withdrawn because no sales contract was formed. Is that what happened? Offer was withdrawn because no consideration had changed hands. The money. Nope. Contract was formed when the seller signed the offer to purchase with no changes. Or contract was formed because buyer agents did not communicate withdrawal in writing. just a reminder, what constitutes becoming under contract? It's not only accepting it by signing it, but also communicating that it was accepted. Do we have a point in here where it was communicated from one side of the fence to the other? Seller signing it, buyer agent calls and withdraws the offer. If the buyer agent called and the listing agent is sitting there watching the seller sign it and they just finished signing it, the buyer agent calls the listing agent. If that listing agent answered the phone by saying, they just signed it, we have a deal, before the buyer agent could say anything, then yes, communication has happened. It's too late. We're under contract. But that's not what happened. The listing agent said, hello. The buyer agent said, stop everything. They're backing out. They're withdrawing. There was no communication, therefore there was no contract. Yes, there's a contract that exists with both parties' signatures on it. Goes back to that example. If a burglar broke in, saw it on the desk and just saw it, oh, they must have sold their house. No, you don't know anything about the status of the communication by looking at the paperwork. So you could have what looks like a contract, but it's not, because the communication has not happened. You would only see the communication element by checking their emails, probably, right? So it was withdrawn because no contract was formed. Didn't have a contract. So there's a great example. A couple of potential test questions. You just have to know the ins and outs. And we just need to, okay, do we have both acceptance and communication? And then also, can they back out? Yeah, before the communication has happened. That's okay. And there was no communication, so therefore they could rescind. So speed is important in this business. Once people express what they want to accomplish and say yes and sign things and give money, let's get those things buttoned up. Let's communicate things ASAP. Oh, I'll call that agent and tell them that we have a deal after the movie's over. Right. Let's go ahead and lock that in. We don't have to get the money in their hand, but we need to communicate that we have a deal. So we have communication, and we don't even have to have the contract in their hand yet. It needs to exist and be signed. But the delivery of the signed contract and the delivery of the money does not necessarily mean we don't have a deal if those things haven't happened yet. It's all about that communication. So look for that in the test question. Where did it get communicated? Here's some frequently used addenda. We'll look at them. I've also, let me show you. Where did I put that? Let me show you. Here's what your folder, your Google folder looks like now. I did a little housekeeping this morning. It's a little neater. Doesn't have all of those individual files anymore. They're in folders now. So all the tests, all the practice exams are in their own folder. All of those license law, commission rule, and comments documents are in their own folder, North Carolina Real Estate Commission documents. The onesie twosies I just left alone for now. The syllabus, because it's so important, I left alone. I didn't put it in another folder. I think I gave you some practice exams for tax there. The policy procedures, the study schedule, and the residential guidelines, that yellow book, all of those are still one-offs and right here. But now I've added this folder, forms. If we click on forms, that is where I've put the contract and the listing agreement and all these things called Form 2A9T, blah, blah, blah. I could go through and rename them like backup contract addendum, additional provisions addendum. They are all the addenda that are mentioned in your syllabus, because the syllabus wants you to look and have access to those addenda. So that's where they are now. Just go to your, and I might have messed up some links in the Notion by moving some things around, but you can always just go open up this link to the pre-licensing materials and you can find everything there. So let's look at some of these addenda. One of them is called an additional provisions addendum. It has, I think now we're up to 6, I believe, possible items on it. You're not probably going to ever use all of them on that. We'll look at that in a moment. because that's a very commonly used one. A backup contract addendum is something that you would use if the house is already under contract, but your client still wants to make the offer and then become a backup, be in the backup position. It might be, especially in this competitive market, the house is sold, or they pick another offer and your client loves it so much, they're so heartbroken, you lost out, that they say, well, could we at least be a backup for them? And you could call that listing agent and say, would they accept our offer as a backup? And then you would include this backup addendum. It's got some things in it that allow it. They say, hey, this is the party that is acknowledged to be in the automatic second position. So if the accepted offer, the primary buyer, for some reason does walk away, back out, we immediately rise to the primary spot. My client is now the primary buyer. So we'll kind of dig into that a little bit and you'll see it firsthand. Got to be careful with that one though, because your client is still going to want to keep looking probably. And if we keep looking, even though have a backup position with somebody and they fall in love with a different house, what if they fall in love with this thing and while we're still looking and they're visualizing their family in it, I get a call from the listing agent and they say, oh, good news, that primary buyer walked. You are now under contract. They are now in the primary position. Oh, wait. Oh, no, we don't even like that one anymore. We like this one better. So the minute you think that there's a better one that they want to make an offer on, and if they're worried about not being able to and having to buy that other one it's just not that they'd have to buy it, but they're going to have to give them due diligence money, right? They don't have to give the due diligence money to go into the backup position. But once that backup position turns into the primary spot as a buyer, they're obligated to give that seller the due diligence money, right? So if they've fallen in love with a different house, now they're going to have to give that other seller the due diligence money they promised if they rise to that primary spot before they can make an offer on this new one they like, and then also use due diligence money to buy the new one. So it's just all comes back to the money. We'll look at it. The contingent sale addendum, we left that in here. We don't have that anymore. A couple of years ago, the commission said, you know what? Y'all aren't using it, so we're going to get rid of it. The Realtor Association, I should say. The contingent sale addendum says buyer has a house that needs to close so they can get the proceeds from that sale in order to buy your house. So this offer we're making to you is contingent on that sale going through. If that sale doesn't go through, we can't buy yours. Do you think a seller wants to know if you might have a deal that falls through that could affect their deal falling through? I've had them where about 5 were stacked up in a row. My listing, my seller was using me to help them sell their house, and then they were going to buy a house, which I was going to help them with. But then the buyer for this one that I needed, my listing for them I needed to sell, that buyer had to sell a house. So there was a buyer for theirs and for the buyer for ours so that mine could buy that one. And that first buyer in the whole lineup decided to walk away. And they just fell like dominoes. And didn't have a buyer for our listing anymore. Therefore, they couldn't afford to buy the new house. And so it all kind of fell apart. That's when you still act nice, because if they get tired and they say, I just want to take a break, this has all been very emotional, very politely, you just let that happen. And then a year later, true story, they come back to you and they buy even a bigger house. So that's cool too. I had started my own firm by then too, so I got an even better commission cut. So I was glad I didn't fuss at them for backing out. FHA VA financing addendum. If your buyer is using VA funds, Veterans Administration funds, meaning they're a military or honorably discharged military, or their spouse has access to it too, they can get a VA loan. We're going to learn about those today. And then FHA is another type of loan that it's a loan that's good for people with lower credit scores or less down payment money available, or both. And there's an addendum that says, look, because it's an FHA or VA loan, Even though this buyer goes after the due diligence period when they choose to walk away, they are going to get their earnest money back, no question, because it's an FHA or VA loan. It's a built-in financing contingency, right? Remember we said in the standard contract 2T, there is no financing contingency? Well, there's not, but you could add one, and this is how you would do it when it's a VA loan or an FHA loan. This is a special addendum you would add so that you give them that privilege, that protection. If it doesn't appraise, they can still buy it. And if they choose to walk, they get their earnest money back. The lead-based paint hazard addendum is about this date. Write this date down when it comes to lead-based paint, 1978. If the house was built in 78 or before, it might have lead-based paint in it or on it. They might have used lead-based paint. Somewhere under all the layers of paint that have been put on it in the meantime, because between 78 and now, they probably repainted a few times. But if you dug down to the wood, that lead-based paint that was put on early might get released into the air, become dust that could be breathed, and that's a hazard that could cause things like, it's a hazard to the very old and the very young. If the little kids chew on the windowsill, they could get down to the wood, they could ingest the lead-based paint, and it could cause problems. It could cause sickness. And so we have to disclose when the house was built. If it's built 78 or earlier, you have to include the lead-based paint addendum. We'll get to that in a moment. Short sale addendum, buyer possession before closing. We talked about that situation, or seller possession after. So we're going to look at those things too. Here's the additional provisions addendum. Here's what it could be. Here's what could be added. Let me find it and then pull it up. There we go. Okay. Additional provisions addendum. It's got 6 things. First of all, we don't use this too much because sellers don't put up with it right now. But in a neutral market, or certainly when it gets back to a strong buyer's market, you'll see these pop up more. This is saying, look, we're going to make an offer, but we want this offer to expire. We don't want that seller to drag us out and make us wait forever to give us a decision. This offer is only good until fill in the blank date and time. Noon tomorrow, 5 p.m. today. Time is of the essence. If it goes past this date and time that we're going to put in these blanks, then this is no longer an offer. It's dead. So it's a place to make an expiration for your buyer's offer, or your offeror's offer. This one's about the septic system. Number 2 is about septic system installation. We need to put a septic sewage system in that perks for a certain number of bedrooms. Is it going to be a conventional system or something else? If the ground doesn't absorb properly, then you could pay extra money and have a more advanced system, and that's when you would fill in the blank and explain what that is. But a conventional system would be the norm. Ground absorption sewage system for a blank bedroom home. You want to build a 3-bedroom home? Let's make sure it perks for a 3-bedroom home. And then it outlines, except for costs of clearing the property, all expenses for obtaining such permit will be the buyer's expense, unless otherwise agreed upon. Sellers responsible for clearing that portion of the property required by the county to perform the tests or inspections by no later than fill in the blank. Need to give them access. They don't need to have to crawl through all the honeysuckle and poison ivy and dense deep woods to get through there. The health department would send a person out there to core out the ground and do the perk test. You would tell them, I want you to test right here because here's what I want, where I want to put the house. Therefore, the septic would be right over here. Or that would be if you have the health inspector do it. But you could get a little more information and test more areas than just the one. Because if it's like a 5-acre piece of land, you might want to consider other parts of it. A couple of different back corners, or maybe right in the middle. You want to get perk tests to see where on the lot perks best. and decide where to put the house after you know that information. And that's when you might, instead of using the health department person, hire a soil engineer, because they'll perk in several places. Yes. That's what people do. And so that would be about having that building inspector who issues the final certificate of occupancy, make sure that they are okay, and that they would probably not want to see a closet in that room. And so what a lot of savvy builders will do is build an indentation into the wall with no door and no rack. So it's not officially a closet, but later, wink, wink, somebody could throw up a door and it becomes a closet. Will you see that kind of thing? I'm not saying it's allowed. I'm just saying that's how they get around it. It could be that it only perks for a 4-bedroom with a conventional system, but if you go ahead and spend a little more money, maybe replace some dirt with more absorbative dirt, if that's a word, you could turn it into a 5-bedroom perk situation. Or it might be that if we have enough leach field area to put those hundreds of foot long leach field pipes, maybe with more of those, we could get it up to 5. So there's options. There's things to consider there. But yeah, you're right. That is a common way people handle the situation. It's just that if they were to go sell it before, at any point actually, even after they put in the closet, it still officially perks for 4, but there's 5 bedrooms. Whatever agent lists it could only call it a 4-bedroom. You're welcome. And then the next one is for rental income, number 3. That's this one. Here we go. Rental income. The property is conveyed subject to existing leases. Seller needs to give them all the paperwork, because you can't just boot out the tenant. Just because we have a new owner doesn't mean the tenant has to go. You can't. You have to honor the existing lease. Therefore, let's tell the new owner, the buyer, let's give them the lease and all the other pertinent paperwork. True and complete copies of all leases, rental agreements, outstanding tenant notices, because maybe they've been late. Statements of any oral tenant agreements, deposits, security deposits, and claims made by or to tenants. That security deposit, it held in connection with the lease, shall be transferred to buyer. That's not for the seller to get, because the tenant's still there. It's not given to the owner until the tenant leaves if the tenant left it in bad condition. Therefore, it's still their money. It's held in trust, and therefore the new buyer needs to have ownership of that money, because they're going to be the owner when the tenant is no longer there. And the security deposit needs to be dealt with then. And then it gives a couple of check boxes if the seller is going to also transfer over any pet fee or pet deposit, which is not required. That is non-refundable. Think of a pet fee, by the way. We'll get into that when we talk about rental stuff. But it's sort of like due diligence money in that it is non-refundable. It is not rent. It is purely for the privilege of having a pet. It's just pay me for the privilege of me letting you have an animal. So it's up to the seller if they're going to pass that over to the buyer or not. Little couple of blue boxes here. Reminders on these first two to get all this handled within the due diligence period, because these might be reasons the buyer wants to walk away. And then this third one, don't use this provision about the security deposit for property that falls under the Vacation Rental Act. Vacation rental property, that's short term, right? That's property like beach condo, mountain place, vacation rental situation, not anything more than that. This one last on the page here looks confusing, because you're like, Neil, you just told us we can't draft legal language, and here they are giving me 11 or 12 lines. What am I supposed to do with that word? How big is that word? Supercalifragilistic. What other word could go there? This is for handling things that are important to the party that they're maybe worried won't come up on the inspection, for instance. It says the seller agrees to the following prior to settlement date and at their expense to complete the following items. It could be like a carpet replacement, because it's green shag and dirty, and the buyer's like, well, I'll buy it and I'll pay you $350, but only if it's got new carpet when I move in. Therefore, write it in here, seller to put in, replace the carpet. So it's that sort of cosmetic thing a lot of times, or a painting allowance, anything that there's not a normal place within the contract to put, where the seller is providing something, this is where you would write it. But you want to make sure that you're very direct about it, because, that legal language thing. And then the buyer at the bottom says buyer has the right to make sure it's done right, good and workmanlike manner. Some of the things that you put in here could also be something the inspector is going to write up in the report, but maybe your buyer is just nervous, or maybe you're nervous, that you just want to make sure it's redundant. Redundancy is great in contracts. Let's make sure everybody completely understands what is expected. So even though we know that it could even just be a leaky roof because we saw the stains on the ceiling and the water running down the brick fireplace. True story. Even though we know, and we're going to meet the inspector out there and point it out to him, but it might be a dry day on that day. So let's make sure that we put anything that's a concern that we want the seller to fix in here, regardless of whether we think it'll show up on the inspection report or not, even if it will. Let's go ahead and put it in here, because if that's important to your buyer, you're basically saying the buyer will pay this price under these terms if these things are done. Put in the blank what these things are. Then top of the second page, it's a 2-pager. If it's a mobile home, here's where you put the VIN numbers. Remember, manufactured home, the DOT cares about it. Need to tell them, submit an affidavit, DMV, and say, look, this has now become real property. Anytime it's a mobile home, this is just the built-in place, the thing that we would use to acknowledge the VIN numbers. And there's a place for 2 of them, because it might be a double wide. And there's even some blanks. Maybe it's a triple wide. And then finally, the newest one they've added is about the pool. If there's a pool or a spa, any costs associated with putting it in operable condition so that it can be inspected will fall upon whom? Check the box, buyer or seller, negotiable. And if you don't check a box, then by default, the buyer is going to be the one who has to pay to have it unwinterized or put back into operation so that the inspector can make sure it's working right. So that's the additional provisions addendum. We used to, when I first started in the business, the market was more of a neutral, balanced market, and we used number 1 all the time. I made about every offer I made had an expiration, because we didn't want to give the seller at any point we could have backed out. The buyer could have rescinded the offer. If the seller dragged it out over like many days, the buyer could just say, well, then I'm out. But it was just nice to put a little pressure on them. Say, look, guys, we need an answer by tomorrow at 3. We have a close second choice for this buyer, and they're going to want to see if they need to move on to that one. We would use that sort of as stock language, but everything changes, and sellers don't put up with that anymore. So here's the additional provisions addendum: a deadline, tenants in place, septic system, improvements the buyer might want at seller's expense, manufactured housing, VIN numbers, and pools. There they are. The next one, FHA VA financing addendum. We'll learn more about what that means, but the borrower can terminate the offer to purchase after the due diligence period and get their earnest money back. That's the big one. It makes it a financing contingency. It's a financing addendum, right? If the property does not appraise for the purchase price, they can still choose to buy it, but they don't have to. And again, it survives the due diligence period. It's there to protect. But if your buyer is using FHA financing or VA financing, unless you have this addendum built in, they don't get these protections. Just because they're trying to get FHA financing or VA financing, that's not the litmus test. You as a broker need to have reasonable skill and care to know, I better protect them. VA buyer, FHA buyer, better include this addendum, need to attach it to our offer so everybody knows here's the situation. That is on you to use this addendum. If there is none, there is no financing contingency. There are no protections. These check boxes are non-applicable because you didn't attach them, right? Backup contract addendum doesn't exist anymore, but when it was there, well, the reason it doesn't exist, and the reason I'm going to still explain it to you, is we can accomplish the same goal without it. Once upon a time, there was no due diligence period. There was something called an inspection period, which was specifically about inspection stuff. Now there's just a wide open due diligence period where they can back out for any reason or no reason. Well, if a buyer needs to sell a house to get the money from that sale in order to buy the next house, then you would have this contract, this backup. I'm sorry, I'm talking about contingent sale. I don't want to confuse you. Let me keep talking about it. The contingent sale addendum. If the buyer has one to sell in order to buy this current house, then you want that protection in place. But it turned out that once the due diligence period procedure came about in the market, we didn't really see agents using this as much because it was kind of awkwardly written. Nobody really understood the dates. It was kind of confusing. Therefore, instead of bothering with this addendum, we just made sure that we had enough due diligence time built in that the buyer could get their house at least under contract and reasonably confident it was going to actually close before the closing of the one they're wanting to buy. You with me? So we just let the due diligence period handle it instead of using this. And it got to the point where the realtor board was like, well, why even have this if you're always just going to use the due diligence period? So they got rid of it. Doesn't mean that we're not allowed to use something like this. If your client said, well, I'm not comfortable only getting it done during due diligence period, I want to have even more protections. So can we have an attorney draw a contingent sale addendum up specifically? Yes, you can. We're not saying we can't use one. We just don't have the standard form available anymore. Okay, back to the backup contract addendum. The buyer wants a house that is already under contract. Sorry, everybody's sad, just missed it. In fact, you probably even looked at it on the same day, but your buyer took a little longer, or maybe they even made an offer and just weren't chosen. So it is under contract with someone else. Your buyer loves it so much, they say, well, I just really want that house. What if that other one fell through? Could we just tell them that we want to be considered if the other one falls through? You could say, yes, we could do better than that. We can take our spot in line if we use this backup contract addendum. So you would call the listing agent and say, would they take a backup offer? Yeah, they would. Okay, great. And you're going to resubmit your offer, including this addendum, to automatically hold your next place in line. So if that current buyer who the seller's under contract with walks away, for some reason backs out, your buyer with this backup contract addendum is automatically going to rise to that point of the primary buyer position. The notification of moving from that secondary position to the primary must be in writing, and it's outlined in the addendum. We'll look at it. And it's also final, right? It's not like, hey, are you still sure you want to do this? No, you are in it. That was the whole point of the backup contract addendum. Automatic, locked in to primary position. Now, your buyer, they could change their mind and back out for any reason or no reason, but they're going to lose the due diligence money. Backup, if they want to withdraw in the event that we talked about, like, oh, I'm in this backup position on this house and I think it's the perfect house, but let's just keep looking anyway. And you're looking and they're falling in love with another one. And you're like, you like this one? You want to make an offer on it? Yeah, I want to see how this works because that other one doesn't look as good to me now. Then what you probably should do is stop everything and withdraw that backup offer first. Because if you don't, then you could set your client, unless they're okay with paying the due diligence money out, in the event that seller, in the event that they become the primary buyer on that first house, they're in jeopardy of having to pay a due diligence check to them and then also the one that they now want to buy. Backup must be withdrawn before receipt of the notice to move in first position. Let's see what that looks like. think it was back here. There it is. Make this a little easier to read. There we go. So they mentioned don't use this in a short sale transaction. We have a special form for that. This addendum is made a part of the offer to purchase. The buyer and seller acknowledge that the seller is already under contract with someone else, and the primary contract is pending, and this is a backup contract that is in a secondary position. Once the primary contract is terminated, then the backup one is going to rise to this position. Termination of that primary one is evidenced by a written release by all parties, written notice from seller to primary buyer that they're exercising a right to terminate, or written notice from that primary buyer to the seller that they're exercising a right to terminate. Final judgment. It could also be termination of the primary contract is because of some sort of a court action. They mentioned some different forms that could be used to give evidence of this, the release of these things. There's a couple options there. You don't need to look at those. And then buyer and seller agree the buyer may not examine or have access to the primary one without written permission from that primary one. They might want to say, do you really have one? What is it like? They could only see it with permission of the seller and the other buyer, the first buyer. And they might even say, well, I will give it to you, but we're striking through some of the pertinent information. If the primary contract closes, then this backup contract doesn't exist anymore. And if the primary contract is terminated, seller is going to give the buyer written notice saying that now this backup offer is the primary one, and written evidence that the primary one has been terminated. If we keep on going, it talks about the money. Earnest money shall be made payable with the offer, even though it's in a backup position. So you got it. That buyer in the backup position has to go ahead and write the earnest money check. The due diligence check will be due and payable upon delivery of notice of the primary position change. So only if the backup becomes the primary buyer will they need to come up with the due diligence money, which sounds fair. The due diligence period extends through 5 p.m., blah, 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 following seller's delivery of notice of primary. So we're not going to start the due diligence period unless that backup buyer turns into the primary one. And then a settlement date. And so many days following the status of primary position. Buyer can terminate this backup contract without liability by giving written notice anytime prior to receipt of this becoming primary status. So again, make sure you back out if they fall in love with something else and they don't want to risk having to be put into the primary position and having to write a due diligence check. In any event, buyer must receive notice of primary status from seller no later than 5 p.m. Time is of the essence, or this becomes null and void. So that's a thing that exists. You won't be tested more on that. Just know that it exists. Let's see here. Lead-based paint. Let's look at that one. There it is. Lead-based paint is really a disclosure. It's an addendum we're adding to it, but it's because you're showing that you've disclosed things. There's a pamphlet, an EPA pamphlet called Protect Your Family from Lead in the Home that pretty much says, look, lead-based paint could make someone sick, and therefore we need to disclose, here it is, in the box, every buyer interested in a property built prior to 78 is notified there might be lead-based paint in there somewhere. So if you see paint peeling down to the wood, like on the outside, for instance, then there's a chance that that lead-based paint is in there, and those paint chips on the ground get leached into the ground and could get into the well water, and that's a whole other issue that's a concern. If you're hiring somebody to scrape the windows and repaint them, They're supposed to properly put down tarps and collect those chips and not let them just go into the ground. But we're talking about making offers here. So the seller has to disclose when you list a home built prior to 78, we need the seller to check some things and initial some things. Do they know for sure there is lead-based paint? If they do, check this box. More commonly, they're not going to know for sure. The only way a seller would know for sure is if they had work done to the house and the contractor realized, oh, this was built prior to 78, therefore I need to put on my hazmat suit. I need to take a sample of the paint and send it off and test it to see if it's lead-based so that I'll know how careful I need to be when I do the work that involves cutting open the walls and damaging the paint and releasing the dust into the air to be breathed. That's the hazard. So a seller might know because they had work done last year and that contractor had a test and it revealed lead-based, so therefore they would disclose it. Yeah, I know it's got lead-based because we had it tested last year because I had an addition put on. And then do they have records about it or not? If they do, check this box and provide them. If they don't, say so. I don't know, and I have no records because I don't know. I never had it tested. They don't have to have it tested. The seller is not required to have it tested for the selling the house. They just have to disclose it might be there. Proceed at your own risk. So that's the seller's section. The buyer is acknowledging down here, initial, receiving the seller's statement, if there is any, that they received the protection, the protect from family from lead in the home pamphlet, which is available for free. You can find it. And we need to give it to them and have them initial that we gave it to them. And then and this is a form that's going to be handled by both listing agent and buyer agent. The listing agent's going to handle the seller section, obviously. The buyer agent's going to handle the buyer section. When you list it, you should have this thing all filled out from the seller perspective and provide it to the buyer agent so that their buyer can see the status of things. And then the buyer is going to make a choice. They're either going to check this box and accept the opportunity during due diligence period to do a test to see if there's lead-based paint. But more commonly, they're like, you know what? 78, they're probably already 10 coats of paint, and this is hideous paint anyway. I'm going to paint over it myself, so it's going to have another coat. Therefore, let's check this box and waive the opportunity to conduct the risk assessment. Let the seller know, don't worry about lead-based paint. I'm not. I'm just going to paint over it, and I'm waiving the opportunity to do so. And then even the agent gets in on the action, and agent initials saying that they've informed the seller of their obligations under the lead-based paint rules. So that's it. It's required for homes built prior to 78. That's what you need to know. Oh, there we go. And here's the slide for that. Must be used in any residential property built before 78. So be careful when you read the test question. They might very slickly say, property was built in 1979 and the buyer is concerned about lead-based paint. Which of the following addenda are required? Lead-based paint hazard addendum, radon, blah, blah, blah. You know, they might throw in a little subtle date on you and you're just going to need to know, oh, if it says 78 or older, 77, 6543, 1947, etc., then yes, lead-based paint hazard addendum is required. Seller has to provide the addendum, indicate if they know of the existence of lead-based paint, and give the buyer the pamphlet. The agent gives them the pamphlet to pass on. The agent would pass it on. Protect your family from lead in the home. The buyer has two choices. They can either say, well, one of the many things I'm going to do during due diligence is to have a lead-based paint test done by the inspector. Let's see if it's in there, because I've got kids and my kids chew on the windowsills and they might ingest the paint. Or even if it's painted windows, as you're opening and closing the windows a lot, that could release some particles in the air that could be breathed. Or I don't care, I'm not worried about it. I'm going to waive my right to have the assessment done. We'll come back from break. We will talk about the procedures a little more. I'll show you those last few addenda so that you can see them in person. So let's come back in 10. Welcome back. We are back. Let's look at a couple of more of these addenda. Button that up. Owners Association disclosure. What's that about? Let's see. It's remember the RPODs that we talked about? There we go. That RPODs, Residential Property and Owners Association disclosure. That has stuff about the property itself. Is there a problem with the roof, plumbing, electric, HVAC? It also talks about the association, the HOA. But there are some cases where you don't need to provide the disclosure on the property itself. But you always need to disclose about the HOA, and that's what this is for. If it's one of those cases where you don't need to tell them about the property, for instance, new construction is exempt from a property disclosure because it's new. Foreclosures are exempt from a property disclosure, the RPODs. But there's still an HOA, still need to provide disclosure about how the HOA works. Hey guys, help me out. Let's make sure faces are on video for the recording, please. Faces on video. This is what you would use in place of the RPODs because of that. Short sale addendum. We're going to learn about what a short sale is today. But a long story short, if a property owner is missing payments or worried about missing payments, they have a financial hardship of some sort, then they might reach out to their lender and say, look, I need to sell the property because I can't afford it anymore. But the value of it, it's not worth enough for me to get enough for it when I sell it to pay you everything I owe you. So a short sale is getting permission from the lender to pay them less than what you owe them. Maybe you bought it for $400,000 and you borrowed $380,000. Your initial loan amount was $380,000. And it's been about 5 years, and maybe you've got your loan balance down to about $350,000. I'm just pulling from air. Now you owe the lender $350,000, but some crazy thing happened in the real estate market, and it's only worth $320,000. You can only get $320,000 out of it. You don't have enough money in the sale of it to pay the $350,000 loan balance to your lender. They might allow you to give them as much as you can get. Even though it's not that full $350,000, they'll take the $320,000, but they would have to give you permission for that. And it involves a long, drawn-out process called the short sale process. And this is outlining what is involved in that. It says short sale is where the purchase price might be insufficient to enable the seller to pay the cost of the sale. Seller does not have enough liquid assets. Part of that process in a short sale is to investigate and prove to the lender. The lender investigates with your proof where your money is, if you have any. Some sellers have thought they were going to be tricky, and they have dumped like 11 grand of their own money into their kids' bank account. Well, the lender wants to see the kids' bank account too. The lender will also say, before I agree to take less than what you've agreed to pay me, take less than what you owe me, how's your credit card situation? oh, you have 2 credit cards that are not maxed out and you could take a cash advance on them. I want it. Take out the cash advance on those credit cards, give it to us, because we're agreeing to let you pay less. We want to get the money wherever we can. It might be that with all of this short sale stuff, they do agree to it, but the lender still says, well, I'm taking less than what you owe me because I'm going to allow and approve the short sale, but it's still not enough. I'm going to let you go ahead and sell the house and give us all that you get out of it, but we're going to put a deficiency judgment on you that walks around with you for your life, right? Until you pay us the rest of this amount of money that we've decided we also want. So there's all kinds of stuff. Mainly here, make sure everybody knows what's going on. You have to disclose that there is a short sale in progress. If you're listing a house where the seller needs to sell it as a short sale, that's a material fact. You must disclose that material fact. Bear with me one moment. So that's short sale. And really, you're just letting the buyer know, look, the seller's trying to get a short sale approval. It might be that they deny it. The lender might not. Buyers just need to be aware this could take a while. The word short means short of the loan amount, the loan balance that is owed, not short in any kind of a time aspect. I've been involved in a short sale where we were waiting for permission, and we waited a year before we even got a response from the lender about assigning it to a first level negotiator. We'll talk more about short sales in a moment. Well, here it is. It's in your folder, but the guidelines for completing the offer to purchase is a good thing for you to read down through. And there's one of these for most every form. There's a guidelines for the forms so that you can kind of see what's expected to go into those blanks and what those various paragraphs are talking about. So I'm going to let you review that on your own study time. You don't have to see this one, but I mentioned it once upon a time. Remember, the signature line on the front page, top of the page of the contract is only so big. And if it's one of those cases where it's an estate sale and there's 4 adult children who are all married, that's 8 signatures that are needed to list that property and sell it. Therefore, you'd use something like this, an additional signatures addendum, and that's kind of what it looks like. Here's the listing agreement. We've been through that. Offer to purchase. There's the financing addendum. If it's an FHA loan, then check the box. And what we're saying here is the purchaser has the privilege and option of proceeding with buying, even if it doesn't appraise for the full amount, as long as they work out who's going to make up the difference. The appraised value is arrived at to determine the maximum amount that HUD will insure. That'll make more sense in a moment. You put in the blank how much it needs to appraise for. And if it doesn't appraise for this, the buyer can walk away. Not lose their earnest money if it's after the due diligence period. And then that's FHA. If it's a VA financing deal, check that box. Buyer won't lose earnest money if they back out after due diligence ends. So that's really all it's saying. It basically adds a financing contingency in the event that your buyer's using one of these kinds of loans. There's our lead-based paint we saw. And there's a vacation rental agreement in the event that it's a vacation rental as opposed to a normal duration of a rental. Okay. Let's make our way back over here. If offerors and offerees want to add a condition to an offer that is not already in the standard form, they would use what? Tell me in the chat. They want to add something, you use an addendum. Yep. If you want to change something that's already under contract, what is the thing that you use then? Changing a contract, that's an amendment. We're amending the contract, like amendment to the Constitution. Communication of acceptance, what's allowable? Email's fine, phone's fine, in person, hand them over, that's fine. I knew that was coming. That would still fall under the phone rule, and that's okay. Submitting offers to sellers, we're obligated to disclose all offers when? Immediately, but not later than 3 days. So it depends on what the answer choices are available to you. Best choice, immediately, but if they don't give you immediately, if they give you 3, 5, and 7 days, something like that, then 3 days is the best answer there. Listing agent can neither accept or reject an offer, even if they ask you to. Just take it. You know what I want. Go ahead and take it. I don't want to be bothered. I'm busy. No, you got to present all offers. Can't screen offers on their behalf or take it upon yourself to do so. If you have sometimes, some people are a bit volatile. Anybody? Names? Put names in the chat. Just kidding. Don't. Anybody know a volatile person in your life? And you're like, I never want to have to give them bad news because they will just unleash all over me. Even if that's your client and you don't want to tell them that their $300,000 listing, you just got an offer for $100,000 and you know what they're going to say and how they're going to say it. And it's going to hurt your feelings and it's going to make you feel bad. You still have to present all offers, right? You prepare them in advance. You say, look, guys, there might be lowball offers. You can't control what people are going to offer. You don't have to take it. And it might be that they come in low because they don't know any better. They just have to, in order to sleep at night, give it a try. And they try once and then they come right on back into reality. And sometimes what I like to try to avoid is the client getting offended and not responding to the offer. Let's at least keep the momentum going and see if we can go back and forth. But if they come in low, okay, be offended, fine. But let's at least say, well, no, but this. It doesn't have to be a huge drop. It could even be pretty close to the same number. It could even be the same as the asking price. But let's just keep it rolling. I try to encourage them. Let's keep some movement happening. Modifications. If the offeree changes the offer, that is a rejection and a counter. We know that. We've covered that. We do not have a contract at this point. Okay, so there's a form that we can use if a seller wants to reject the offer. Let me see if I might be able to pull it up real quick. There's a form called a response to buyer's offer. Show it to you right here. It gives you three ways you can use this form. You pick one of the three. If it's just a straight up rejection and you just want to have a nice, neat and clean and tidy written form acknowledging that this seller has rejected this offer and here's their signature proving it, because maybe that buyer agent wants to see it in writing more than just an email notification. The third check accomplishes that. Thank you for your offer. We cannot accept it and hereby reject it. They would use one of the three. Let's go back to the first one. This was the reason this form was even made, and then they kind of modified it and added those other options over time. but it says, look, I am not accepting your offer. This is still a rejection. However, we would look favorably upon the following changes. If you want to try again, here's some guidelines for you so as not to waste your time or my time. And then you fill in the blanks. You could give this to all 5 of the competing offers that came in. You're not countering any of them. You're rejecting all of them, but you're also giving all of them a chance to get it closer into the ballpark of where your client wants to be. As long as your client is willing to risk the chance that all 5 walk away and never come back, because it's 5 rejections, it's also 5, hey, try again, and here's what you might. It also doesn't obligate them. The main thing about this is it does not obligate them to, if that buyer strengthens their offer again and comes back, even according to exactly what you told them you would like to see, the seller still doesn't have to take it. It's just like, try again under these suggestions and maybe I'll reconsider. Maybe I'll take it, maybe I won't, right? So it's a great form as long as they're willing to risk the person never coming back and not actually strengthening their offer. So it's a rejection. It's also not a counteroffer, but try again under these changes. And then a little all caps caveat: understand that until an offer has been accepted, we are free to consider and accept anything at any time until we accept one and go under contract. It depends on the type of market. It was definitely used quite a bit before this last couple of year crazy market, but it is useful. It depends on how somebody wants to handle a multiple offer situation. If they want to go on record and say, look, guys, you might not say this out loud, but maybe they're all lowballing, or maybe they're all just coming in so close to each other. I've had them before where we had 3 offers and they were all within like $1,000 or a few $100s of each other, asking for the same stuff, even had similar types of financing. So it wasn't like a clear better chance of one succeeding than another. And so we did this, and then they all came back and revised, and they were still all neck and neck, and we did it again, and then a third time, and I felt kind of bad for each agent. And some of them were suspicious, and they're like, yeah, you're just stringing us along, but I can't help it. I got to do what I got to do. It finally became pretty clear cut. One of them was more interested than another and came back, and it worked. But then the second one is what we would use to tell everybody, here's the deadline. It says, thank you for your offer. We intend to consider all offers received by, I keep saying noon tomorrow, 6 p.m. on Saturday, whatever it is. If you want to submit a new, stronger offer, you should submit your best offer as soon as possible and not later than this date. However, understand that we could choose to accept any offer up until and before that deadline. We're not going to wait till the deadline to decide. The seller might choose to go ahead and pick one and run with it. So it really reserves a lot of rights to the seller, reserves a lot of leeway for them. So that's what that is. It's pretty useful, and it just depends on how you want to do business. It might just be that you like having the form with people's signatures on it to make things kind of official. That could be useful for some types of people. Personality types, meaning that people that just need a little push, need to see something in writing. Okay. We know this one already. If an agent calls you and says, what do I have to do to beat the other offers? Whose permission do we need to tell them the answer to that? Careful. What do I have to do to beat the other offers? What's the highest offer on the table? This is not for the seller to give permission. This is for the one who has the highest offer to give permission, and they never will, because that would be dumb. We cannot disclose the terms of an offer without the permission of the one who's the highest on the table. If there are multiple offers in existence, that is for the seller to decide to disclose or not. But what I think happens a good bit is the agent never has this conversation with the seller and goes ahead and takes it upon themselves to blab to the whole world because they're proud of it and they think it's always good to tell it, yes, we have multiple offers. You should get in line. But that's not necessarily the best thing because you might be scaring away somebody that's kind of jaded, somebody that just lost out on 10 in a row. They're like, well, forget it. I'm not even going to try. And they would have been the best one. You just cost your seller that because you got too chatty, right? Not that you ever would, but some do. Multiple offers are not material fact. The status of multiple offers is not a material fact. How many? And how many is a number? What are some numbers? Give me some random single-digit numbers. Just tell me in the chat. Like 7. Let's work down from there. Give me some other examples of numbers. What is he talking about? What is he crazy? Keep going down. Keep going down. Yeah, keep going down. Yeah, 1, 0. Those sound like numbers to me. We got no offers on the table. Agent calls me. Do we have multiple offers? I'm sorry, the seller has not given me permission to disclose the status of multiple offers. Oh, okay. Right? So, don't give away the farm. If one party's notified, all parties must be notified. That's the other thing. Don't be choosy and pick one and tell one, oh yeah, no, we can't tell you how many, but then tell the next one, oh, there's 4. You got to answer the same for everybody. Be fair to everybody. Brokers have to provide all parties with copies of anything they signed immediately, but not later than 3 days after execution, after they're signed, right? There's that 3-day thing again. So pretty much immediately, as soon as they sign something, give it to them. Give a copy of it to them, but not later than 3 days. If there's a whole lot of changes, we saw this already, instead of having that little right corner with like 5 or 10 of them, it gets messy. And see, they've struck through some stuff. They've got initials, they've got extra words and dates, and it gets all cluttery, and we're not sure which thing is even happening anymore. What was finally agreed upon? That's easy to do over where it talks about a home warranty. Did they agree to provide one or not? Because both boxes got checked at some point, and it's just impossible to tell anymore. So let's just scrap it. Write it all nice and fresh and clean without those changes along the way and put the most recently agreed ones in. So it's nice and easy to understand. If offerors and offerees want to add a condition to a contract, not offer, but a contract, what would they use? I know I said the word add, but it could also say add or change, because it could be an add or a change. The point is, we're putting it and modifying a contract, not an offer. When we're modifying a contract, we're going to use an amendment, right? So don't key in on the word add, even though it's nice and convenient. We could add terms to a contract with an amendment. It could be that originally the offer became a contract and it was going to be a purchase price of $300,000 with no closing cost for the buyer being paid by the seller. But then the inspections happened and we needed about $10,000 worth of repairs, and the seller doesn't want to do it or can't get them done in time or doesn't have the money available. All the money they've got is what they're going to get when they sell it. Therefore, instead of having the repairs done, they say, well, how about we make it $300,000 for the price, or whatever I just said it was, and the seller will pay $10,000 toward the buyer's closing costs. That was an addition. You added an element to a contract, but you added it to what? Not the offer, but you added it to a contract that was already in place. Therefore, we'll use this thing called an amendment to the contract. It's a very original name. I'm looking for it. I wanted to show it to you. Oh, that's called an agreement to amend. I always get that wrong. Here we are. Here's what that looks like. It's another one that accomplishes multiple goals. Get that bigger. It could be that while you're under contract for various reasons through the negotiating of repairs, for instance, or the appraisal, if the appraisal comes in lower than what you agreed upon to sell it for, it might be that the seller agrees to come down to the appraised price in different kinds of markets than now. They might not right now, but they would in some kinds of markets, like a neutral, more of a balanced one. If you need to change the price, you'd use this thing. Changing the price from this to that. If you need to add earnest money, whether it'd be additional earnest money in this case, we're changing it from this amount to that amount. It might be from 0 to 100 to 1,000. And then the date that it's going to be due, this additional earnest money is put in here. If there's a new construction building deposit, if there's due diligence fees that are changing, what if you get to the due diligence deadline and it's the same day, it's that morning, and 5 p.m. you know is when the time is of the essence deadline is happening, but you haven't figured out the repairs yet. The seller hasn't agreed to fix things yet. That buyer needs to decide, am I willing to walk away because the seller won't agree to fix things? Or maybe they verbally agreed, but they haven't yet given me the thing in writing that locked it down. That buyer and you need to talk. Look, if I don't get this by 5 p.m., do you want this to go away? Do you want to reserve the right to walk? Because if we don't tell them that you're walking away, since they didn't agree to fix the things that they promised to fix, if you're walking away, we need you to walk away before 5 so that you get your earnest money back. And you might need to be ready to give me a termination so that I can give them the termination if it goes to 5 o'clock in 1 second. Whatever your strategy is, you with me? Because that's your leverage for getting things fixed. Now, again, they don't have to fix it by 5 p.m. on due diligence. They just need to have it in writing that they're promising to fix it so that you have something enforceable to go after them with later between now and closing. So it might be that that day of due diligence deadline, they say, you know what, we're waiting for an estimate. Could we have it over the weekend to get that last estimate and then lock it down on Monday? Would you let us extend the due diligence period? And either party, for some various reason, might want to extend the due diligence period. Here's what you would use to do that. And it might be that the party says, who's being asked, you want another week of due diligence? Well, I'm going to need another 1,000 of due diligence money to give you that extension, right? So that's why we have that for both. We have an ability to extend both the period and get more money of due diligence. If we're changing the escrow agent, who's holding the escrow, it might be that we thought the attorney could hold it or the brokerage when we wrote the initial offer and it became a contract, but turns out either they don't want to or they can't or they don't have an account and we need to move it over to another one, or they pick a different attorney. If you're closing with a different attorney than the one you thought you were going to use in the beginning, it needs to be the one you actually close with who's holding it, so it might need to change hands. So that's what you would use for that. And then settlement date. You know that we put in a settlement date in the contract without the words time is of the essence, but there's a built-in 7-day period of flexibility. What if we get to day 7 and the mess still isn't cleaned up, but we still need to wait and push it beyond that 7th day of buffer? So we're 7 days past the settlement date that's in the contract. And if we go to the 8th day, we're going to need permission by all the parties. This is what we would use for that. Settlement date is hereby changed to such and such. Now, this little checkbox under it is optional. The delay in settlement is amended for changing the permitted time a delaying party may delay. In other words, are we going to give them a new 7 days of cushion with this new settlement date? Maybe not. Maybe we want to only give them a 4-day extension wiggle room. That's what this is about. And then this one's used a lot. This is the one that says, oh, you know what? For various reasons, we're going to have the seller pay some of the buyer's closing costs, or maybe all of them. And we're going to change it from 0 to 8,000, or maybe from 3,000 to 5,000, because it's about $2,000 worth of repairs needed. So instead of having them fix stuff, let's just get more money off of our closing costs that we need to bring. Let the seller pay it and handle the repairs that way. Lender won't allow it. Right. Yeah. Mm-hmm. But that shouldn't really factor in, but some agents are going to get fussy about that. But you can't argue with the lender's requirement. And that's a great point that comes up in this current chapter 11 coming up. The lender has restrictions on how much the seller's allowed to pay for the buyer's closing costs. There's a limit. And some loan types, the max is 3% of the loan amount is the most a seller can contribute toward the buyer's closing costs. So the first question when this comes up as a possibility in negotiating, let's see what the lender will allow. What's the max the lender will allow for closing? Oh, we need to account for more money than the lender will allow the seller to pay, then we're going to need to tweak the price a little bit. But then if it's later in the process of the loan, it's a big hassle for the lender to change the contract price. So it's always this juggling act kind of thing. If at all possible, best case is to change those closing costs or some sort of other allowance. What you can't do is money under the table, right? Cash in the waiting room of the attorney. That's considered loan fraud if it's not reflected on the settlement statement that outlines every single cent in the transaction. It's tempting. Yeah. Yeah. Maybe. It just depends on your time frame and having to restart the loan application process, loan approval process. You know, if you're doing all this the day before closing, people have already made commitments in moving plans and stuff, and that might be a factor. But if it's like still 2 or 3 weeks before and you can still meet the same time estimates to close, probably no big deal. If there's a warranty, you can ask the seller to provide a home warranty for the buyer that they pay for. And maybe initially they didn't ask for one, but now as part of the whole repair negotiations, they say, well, now that I know that the heating and air system is kind of not working great, can we have a warranty in addition to you fixing the best that you can what's there without replacing it? At least give me a 1-year warranty. Whatever the reason is, you can add that in. And so this is multi-purpose, and it's clearly an amendment, an agreement to amend. Multiple offers should be delivered in the order received so the offeree can consider each one in the proper order. Is that true or false? Do we give them in the proper order, in the order received? No, we just give them all at the same time if we can. We don't show any priority for when they came in. We just need to, we check back our email after a couple hours and we've got 5 more, give them all 5. You're not saying this one came in first, none of that. Deliver immediately upon receipt. Just keep them coming. Even if it's after a deadline, because you have to present all offers. Almost done here with 10. A couple things. An installment land contract, that's seller financing. Options to purchase and preemptive rights are kind of similar. The installment land contract, seller is retaining legal title. They keep the deed because they're the bank. You're paying them not the big lump sum of purchase price, but you're paying them monthly payments with interest built in. The buyer is getting equitable title. That means the permission to possess it. They get to use it. If you just saw it on the surface, you'd think, oh, they own it because they're driving their trucks and cars and living out of it. But the seller has the deed. The buyer has possession. Once the debt is paid off, once that mortgage is cleared, you've paid the seller everything you promised to pay them, the deed and legal title transfers. These installment land contracts should be recorded. Not required, but they should be. And the parties involved are called some weird words. Usually the parties involved, the words make sense, like mortgagor, mortgagee, offeror, offeree. But this time when it's an installment land contract, the seller is the vendor, the buyer is the vendee. I have no logic offered to you to help you remember that. You just have to think, this is the weird one. It's weird in terms of there's no standard form. We don't have a standard form for seller financing. We need to get the attorney to draw it up special. Therefore, it's also weird in the parties. Maybe it's the weird thing that helps you remember it. It's tough on the buyer when you have to foreclose because the buyer has made payments. Maybe those payments were going to be credited to the property over time. They losing everything. They're losing all those payments. They're losing the property itself, and they're losing any profits on the sale of the property. So it's not great for a buyer. What type of buyer in terms of financial ability and financial choices and maybe credit score, what type of buyer is most attracted to a seller financing deal or an installment land contract? One with very few options. Buyers that don't have many choices probably can't just walk into Bank of America and get a home loan, right? Yeah, investors, that's a different animal. They do things a little differently in commercial side of things. But in a residential, it's probably maybe even a property that's not had too much success selling either. A seller's willing to entertain the seller financing because they don't have many other choices. They've had trouble selling it. Or they see the value in being the bank and making the interest themselves. I wouldn't mind being the bank. Having a bunch of people owe me money or pay me money. Let me say it that way. Option to purchase. We talked about this a little bit. This is a form of a unilateral contract, by the way. Hello, Margie. Margie just joined us. An option to purchase. The optionee is paying a fee for the option to decide later. They're deciding that they don't know yet. They're saying, I'll give you money, seller, because I want to decide if I'm going to actually buy it, not today. I'm going to decide later. Maybe I'll have a year to decide because I'm waiting to see how the zoning rules are going to change. Laws might change in the favor of making this property more attractive to me. Or the road's going through and it's going to be right here. Therefore, it'll be more valuable later. With an option to purchase, the optionee, the potential buyer, does not live there in the meantime, right? Option to purchase is not a renter living there deciding to buy it. This is someone else, an investor maybe, somebody saying, I might want to buy that property over there. They stay off of it. They just wait and decide at whatever point during the option period if they want to exercise their option to buy it. Need to record it in order for it to remain and to become enforceable. The optionor cannot terminate. That seller has to sit there. They took the money and they gave them the year or the 2 years or the 6 months or however long the option period is for. And they have to just sit there, twiddle their thumbs and wait to see what that potential buyer wants to do because they sold the buyer a period of time to make a choice. They're waiting. Buyer is in control. They can choose to buy it. They can choose to walk. They're losing the option fee either way. They've already paid that for the privilege of the time. They are not a renter. It's not the case of a renter living there renting it and might want to buy it. That's one of these. Preemptive rights sound and smell like option to purchase, but now we're talking potentially about this being a renter who might want to buy it. There are two categories of a preemptive right. One is called the right of first refusal. It's not a promise to sell, but the the potential buyer who has the right of first refusal is saying, let me have the chance to match any offers you might get in the future because I might want to buy it, but you're not wanting to sell it yet. But if some other third party comes along and makes you an offer, you won't sell it to them without checking with me first. And I have it in writing that you'll do that. And we'll worry about the price later because I don't know what I'm going to have to match or beat until later, till another one comes in, till something. This is not something you're negotiating now. You're just reserving your place in line with the right of first refusal. If you get an offer in the future, you can't sell it to them without checking with me to see if I want to meet or beat it. That's right of first refusal. Give me first chance. A good renter potential here. The renter, I'm going to rent the property from you. I love living here. If you ever think you want to sell it, I'd love to buy it. You don't want to sell it yet? Okay. Well, if in a year or 3 years or whenever somebody offers you to buy it, because I have it in writing as a right of first refusal, you can't sell it to them until you check with me first. Classic example of a renter who likes the property and might want to buy it later. And we'll worry about how much. We'll negotiate that down the road because I don't know what I need to beat until the other one comes in. Or a right of first opportunity to purchase. The owner offers the property to the party holding the right. You go ahead and negotiate the price now. It's just that, do you want to sell it now? No? Okay, let's go ahead and figure out what it's going to cost me. And then you will let me know when you're ready to sell it. Right of first opportunity to purchase. So an option to purchase, tenant has the right to decide whether they want to purchase the property at a future date. Is that what we're talking about with an option to purchase? Is there a tenant in the property with an option to purchase situation? That's correct, Shane. Good job. False. Sorry, I was catching up on the chat. Option to purchase would not have a tenant in place. That would be a right, a preemptive right of some sort. An option does not involve possession or being allowed to use the property. So recap, all offers must be submitted to the seller immediately, but not later than 3 days, or I should say offeree. Multiple offers must be submitted immediately, no screening. Just give them everything as you get them. The existence of multiple offers is not a material fact. It's for the seller to tell you whether they want you to disclose it. And if you have a lot of changes during negotiations, make a nice new crispy clean offer, have both parties sign it, keep it legible and clear to avoid confusion. And that is 10. Let's talk about 11. You've got some places in the syllabus. We got some, as you're making, this is another, they're all important about the syllabus, but this is going to give you a lot of guidelines. Let's look at it. Here we go. So we've made our way on down through. We're now in, there it is, financing in the syllabus. Some basic terms, good, nice big blank spaces here for you to write definitions. Test yourself once you read it. Talking about discount points and how much they cost. There's a good bit of math in this section. Some calculations, something called LTV, loan to value ratio. More words, hypothecation, mortgage. Acceleration clause. Yeah. Okay. So the syllabus is your friend. Let's keep a watch on that. We're going to be talking about, there it is. The financial crisis, things that led up to 2008 and what changes were made as a result of that. We did things differently before. We do things differently now. One of them is the appraisal process. Before then, lenders would pick the appraiser they liked the most. If that appraisal came in kind of low, the sale price was $500,000, but the appraisal came in at $480,000. The lender might try to lean on the appraiser a little bit, maybe, and say, you know what, we really want to make this one work. You sure that you can't bring this up to the 500? Well, clearly, a lot of fraud happened. There were bad appraisers giving fake amounts. There were bad real estate agents, bad attorneys, all colluding, bad loan originators, all trying to deceive the investor whose money was being borrowed and inflating appraisal values, and things really weren't worth what they were claiming to be worth. And then they would split the profits, the phantom profits, defrauding the investor. Well, one of the changes that happened was now when you order appraisals, they have to be ordered through a third-party company because we need some distance between the lender and the appraiser. We can't have direct communication because it's too easy for this fraudulent activity to take place. Need to have a disinterested third party. Well, who's paying them? That had to be figured out. They needed to make some money for handling this ordering of the appraisal, and some appraisers weren't too thrilled about adapting into that new system. The appraisals have gone up to help account for that. But at the time, the appraisal, that money to the third parties were kind of coming out of the appraiser's pocket until the consumers got used to paying higher amounts for appraisal fees. And there in the beginning, you might end up with an appraiser who lives in Gaston County and works there, but got the job in Kannapolis over in Cabarrus, 2 counties over. How good of a job are they going to do? Maybe okay, but they'd probably do better if it were their own market that they're used to, right? Growing pains. We're going to talk about the role of the Federal Reserve. What is this thing called primary and secondary mortgage market? What's the difference? Some different types of loans, the big three: conventional loan, FHA loans, and VA loans. You'll see those the most. Residential practices of lending. What are the requirements for disclosure? Like a good faith estimate disclosure versus the closing disclosure at the end. They need to kind of match as far as the numbers being reported. What you told that borrower that they're going to have to pay to borrow the money needs to be what they actually ended up paying, or better, not more. Oh gosh. Yeah, I do. Am I not showing it? Oh, I'm still on the, thank you. Thank you. Good catch. There we go. It's not that fancy of a slide yet, but let me make this a little better. Thank you. There we go. All lined up. And then finance legislation and their purposes. Some level 1 stuff are the primary and secondary markets, monetary policy, Equal Credit Opportunity Act. We need to be fair when we're issuing credit to people, sort of like the Fair Housing Act. Application level 2 stuff. We're going to dig deeper into what is a conventional FHA and VA loan, mortgage lien priority, legislation, all of it in your syllabus under section 11. Okay. Principal and interest. If anybody has ever had a car loan, motorcycle loan, house loan, you know what this is. You're paying money in the form of interest for borrowing money from the lender. The reason the lender loans you the money is not to make themselves feel good, but to make money on your money, right? You're borrowing $100,000 from them. That's your principal loan amount. They're going to charge you interest on that $100,000, a little bit at a time. So principal is the process of paying down your debt. You're paying off that principal of the loan. Principal being not the human, we're not talking about clients and customers now. Those are principals to a transaction. This is principal in terms of money. By paying down the principal loan balance, anytime you see the word principal, fill in your mind with those other 2 words, principal loan balance. You're paying down the loan, and that's putting your money into the property, creating and building equity. Having a fully paid for house with no loan means you have 100% equity. The whole value of the house is your equity because you own it free and clear of any loans. But many people can't buy a house with all cash and therefore have 100% equity. And some, even if they could afford to, they don't want to because the interest rates are low enough that it's a better deal financially for them to borrow someone else's money at not that high of a rate, better than most every other rate that you deal with in life, and use leverage to buy things. That's how people buy multiple things. They have 5 different properties with loans instead of only one that they own 100% cash, free and clear, 100% equity. So principal, loan amount, and then the interest is what you're paying every month as part of your payment. If it's an interest-only payment, then your entire payment is going toward that interest, which is profit to the lender. And you're never knocking down any of the loan. You're never making any progress. And that happened a lot in those 2000 era times. People would not really be able to afford the property, but they would go ahead and, sorry, I'm pulling up my iPad. There it is. They couldn't afford the $1,500 a month payment, but that was the payment that included paying down some of the principal loan balance. With every monthly payment of $1,500, for instance, they would knock down the amount that they owed. But there was an option, a choice that most lenders would make available to them called a pick a payment, and they could choose to do the interest-only option, which is literally just paying the lender what they're charging for the borrowing of the money. So an interest-only loan, there we go. There we go. The full normal payment where you're paying some principal and interest might be $1,500. If times are hard, maybe you're in full 100% sales kind of income and you need to make a lower payment without falling behind, your lender might let you make an interest-only payment in the amount of $1,200. But none of that payment, all of it's going to the lender in form of profit. None of it is coming off of your loan balance, decreasing what you owe. Because when you bought it, you put a 10% down payment in, so you had 10% equity on the first day, and then you had 90% of a loan to value ratio. What percentage of the value of the property, which is this up here, what percent of that full value are you borrowing? In this case, 90. That's what a loan to value ratio is. What ratio of the loan to the value of the property is being borrowed? 90% of it. You have 10% of your own equity in it, your own money in it, because you brought a 10% down payment to the closing table. So it's always this comparison of equity versus loan amount. And if you make an interest-only payment because times are kind of hard this month, you're not making any progress knocking down this principal. But if you make this kind of payment because times are better and you can afford the 15 instead of the 12, then with that payment, you came down just the tiniest bit. Now your loan amount is just a little bit less than that. And the next month, a little bit less, and the next, and the next, and the next. And then if it's a 30-year loan, that last 360th payment, 12 months times 30 years, right? That 360th payment pays off the entire loan. Congratulations, you own the house free and clear. You now have 100% equity in the property. So now if you sell it, you get the entire amount of whatever it's worth, whatever you can sell it for. So how can your equity position in the property increase? Well, we started out at 10% equity because we put a 10% down payment in. We borrowed 90%. That's all of this. But over time, you could choose, instead of making the $1,500 payment, let's just ignore interest only. We know better than to do that. Instead of making 15, let's squeeze out another 100. Let's make a 1,600. Let's pay them an extra $100 a month. That extra $100 is directly coming off of your principal that you owe without having to pay interest on it. You're giving them what they wanted. They wanted at least 1,500. You're giving them an extra 100. That's knocking down your principal sooner. In fact, this is the power of compounding interest and the way things build up. The old trick to a house payment is, if you change the way you make your payment, if you make half of the payment on the first of the month and then the second half on the 15th, still not late, but divide it up, what you're effectively doing is making 13 payments in 12 months. The way you're doing it, by doing it that way, the net effect of just doing it that way the whole time is you lower the time it takes you to pay off the loan from 30 years to approximately 23. You knock 7 years off. You can pay off a 30-year loan in 23 years if you just make one extra payment a year by doing it in a certain way. So anyway, number one, you can knock down your loan amount, have more equity in the property by making a little extra payment, some amount extra. Another way your equity can increase is that the property appreciates. We saw a lot of equity increase in the last few years. People just sitting there. The market was the market and saw appreciation on a graph going up really steeply. So appreciation of the property, there's going to be some amount of appreciation over a long enough time period, usually. And the third way is improvements, capital improvements, doing stuff to it to make it worth more. Oh, you had an attic when you built it or you bought it, but that attic had a strong enough floor that it could be finished into heated living area. So now when you bought it, it was 2,300 square feet. You've added 5 more 100 square feet. So now you have a 2,800 square foot house, heated and cooled. You spent money to finish those 500 extra feet. Well, how much money did you spend to finish those 500? Probably got back more than you spent, or over time you will, because now you've got a 2,800 foot house and they're worth more than 2,300 foot houses with everything else being equal, right? So making improvements, maybe updating the kitchen and bathrooms, 1980s house that you haven't updated, but then you put 10, 15,000 in it, make the kitchen nice and new and cool with marble countertops and all white cabinets. Maybe stainless, but isn't it funny? Are you seeing white appliances that aren't cheap like they used to be? It used to be the white appliances were the cheapest, but they throw a stainless steel handle on it. They call it frosted white, and it's a premium feature because everybody wants certain things. Those trends happen. These are all ways that this 10% could grow quicker, right? So that's what we're talking about with principal and interest. Oh, I went past the break. Sorry. Let's come back at 12:09. Welcome, welcome, welcome. Here we go. All right. Principal and interest. Keywords, important words. If it's an interest-only payment that you're making, you're not reducing principal at all or increasing equity. You're just paying the lender for the privilege of borrowing the money. There are a couple of different types of payments. A very common one, this whole process of paying down a loan is called amortization. There's a $5 word. If we break that word down, mort, like mortician, mortuary, killing, you're killing the debt, right? You're killing the debt over time. You're paying it down until it's gone. So amortization is the paying down, reducing that amount that's owed to zero. There's lots of different ways to accomplish this. And interest only is not accomplishing it. You're just paying the lender their profit. But an adjustable rate, you could have an adjustable rate mortgage, which means the rate of interest at which you're making your payment, that your payment amount is based on, is going to adjust in some way, in some amount of time. It might be the same thing the whole first year you have it, the loan. But then after the first year, it's going to adjust depending on something. What does it depend on? One of those things that are in the boring section of the newspaper, like a 10-year treasury bill or something. It depends on the loan. It will depend on how that's performing when it's time to adjust, for instance. It'll be spelled out in the fine print. An adjustable rate mortgage is going to be a different rate from time to time. It might be enticing because it'll be a lower rate in the beginning. A fixed rate mortgage is more attractive to those who want some stability. And they just want to know what their payment's going to be the whole time. The entire 360 payments, all 30 years, every payment based on the same rate. Right now, that might be 6%. Last year, this time, that might have been 3%. A year and a couple months ago, it might have been even 2.75%. We got down to that. So people that didn't jump when that was the case might be feeling like they're paying a lot more in interest. But when I got in the business in 1996, 6 and 6.25% was pretty much the norm at the time, and people were fine with that. In the 80s, they got up to 18. I think Margie might have even said 20 or 23%. That's credit card interest rate levels, right? But whatever it is, an amortized loan at a fixed rate, you're going to be making the same payment every month. And the last payment is made same amount as the first payment. And once you make that last payment, you've paid off the entire loan balance, and now you own the whole house, free and clear. Now, out of your payment, let's say it's $1,000 payment. That's your monthly payment. It includes money toward your principal. When you pay $1,000, some of that $1,000 is going to come off of your principal. Let's go with that same initial scenario, 10% down. So we had 10% equity in the beginning on the first day, 90% on that first day. And then you made that first house payment a month later. This 90 went down a little bit. You owed a little bit less to the lender. And now we're 15 years into a 30-year mortgage, and you might be like right about here. Now you owe this much to the lender. Is that 50% of the equity of that property value? Probably not. Even if it's half of what you originally owed, because the property value started here but might have risen and gone up here. So all of that can accumulate in your favor and benefit you. But let's break down this payment. Out of that $1,000, let's say this is the 1,000. That first payment you make in month one, how much of that $1,000 is going to knock down your principal? How much is it going to go toward what you owe to the lender? Not much. Maybe like this much. So this much of that 1,000 if it's principal and interest together, is going to knock down your principal amount, but all of this is going to be fee to the lender for the privilege of borrowing the money. The last payment you make, that 360th payment, how much of that payment is going to be coming off your principal? Probably this much. The opposite. Over time, more and more of that same $1,000 monthly payment is going to come off of your principal. That the percentage of that payment, maybe in the first month, the amount of dollars of that payment that comes off your principal might be $100. But by the 360th month, it might be $990, right? It's going to be the longer you go making payments, the more each payment knocks down your principal. So that halfway through a 30-year loan, you were getting close to that point where it's maybe 500 of that payment is coming off of your principal and 500 is going to the lender. And then you're starting to go in the opposite direction. More and more of the money is going off your off your principal, and less is being paid to the lender. They're kind of front loaded. They're making most of their money in that first part. So amortization, full amortization. First and last payment amounts are the same, and every payment in between, resulting in a final loan balance of zero. Partial amortization is a little different. The first payment you make, and probably all of the payments except for the very last one, are different. The first and all of the other payments are the same amount. So they're all, where am I? What am I showing you? Okay, here we go. There it is. Partial amortization. The first payment and the final payment are different. So while you might pay $1,000 on the first month and every other month, that last payment is what's called a balloon payment. And maybe it's $15,000. Partial amortization. They're letting you pay a lower monthly payment because they're letting you make that last payment as a big chunk. The ending loan balance is whatever's left that you owe after every month except the last one. Let's say we're still with 360 total months. So for 359 payments, those are all at $1,000 each. That last payment is a bigger chunk because it's being partially amortized. They're letting you pretend that you have a different amortization than you really do so that your payment can be lower for most of the loan until the very end when you have to make up the whatever's remaining. And that's called a balloon payment when it's a larger amount at the end. Now, you might have chosen to not pay all 360 payments before, maybe like within 5 years instead of 30 years. 5 years later, you refinance. You go with a different lender. They're going to give you a check for the amount that you owe this first lender you were with, and you're paying off that first lender and you're refinancing into a regular, fully amortized loan, right? If that was confusing, hang in there. We're going to throw these terms around. It might also be the case that you get a loan that's an adjustable rate mortgage, an ARM, and it's going to be the same rate for the first year because you're just figuring if I can just make it through that first year at that nice lower rate, $1,000 or whatever a month, then I know I'm going to have a pay increase. I know I'm going to have some tax return money. I'm going to have some money available. And so if I can just make it with this adjustable rate, otherwise I can't get a loan because adjustable rate mortgages might be a little easier for me to qualify for. So let me just get in it. The old saying is you marry the house, but you date the rate. Go ahead and buy the house, marry it, but then just date the rate. Because your first type of loan you could get to acquire the house might not be the best one you could ever have, but it's the one you qualify for. But at least you have a house that is now appreciating, that you can now put capital improvements in to make sure it goes up. Maybe you can even squeeze out a little extra payment a month and knock your principal down that way. So you start out with this adjustable rate mortgage, and then before it adjusts, you refinance into a regular fixed rate mortgage. You refinance to a fixed. You pay off that lender that was giving you the adjustable rate, and you go with the lender that's giving you a fixed rate because you fixed your credit problem, your score's better, and you've got a little bit extra money available to you. So there's all kinds of things that people will do to weave in and out of this interest stuff. Interest only, you're not making any progress. You're basically renting in essence. The borrower still owes the original loan amount. So there it is. Fully amortized is the best one. Same payment each month, ending in a zero balance. Partial, same payment each month until the last payment, and that one is larger than all the others because you amortized it as if it were a 30-year loan, but it was actually a 15-year. So you had to pay whatever was remaining on that. What would that be? 360, that'd be 180, the 180th. And then an interest only, you're only paying interest, you owe the full loan amount whenever you do sell it. Default and foreclosure, fun, happy words, right? This stuff is all about foreclosure, and the process of foreclosure varies from state to state. Some states do it differently than others. And we have a very convenient situation here. North Carolina does it differently than South Carolina. When you borrow money from a lender, you're basically signing papers that say, I promise I will pay you back. Thanks for loaning me this. I'll pay you back. And that's what's called a promissory note. It outlines the terms that you're borrowing the money at, the interest rate, the number of payments, how much money you're borrowing. But this is a lot of money we're talking about. This isn't just a $2,000 paycheck loan, or even if it's, I don't even know if they are that much. This is a lot of money. So that lender is probably not going to be happy with your signature on a promissory note against your own personal debt. They're going to want collateral, and that's where the mortgage comes in. The mortgage, and I use that word because that's what everybody is familiar with. The mortgage is when you say, I will buy this house with this money you're loaning me, and I will put this house up for collateral so that if I don't live up to my end of the deal, you get to take the house from me. In South Carolina, it's called a mortgage because that is what's a lien theory state. We'll get into that in just a couple slides. In North Carolina, it's called a deed of trust because there's a third party involved in the mix, but it's the same idea. You're putting the property up as collateral in both cases. And then if you default on your payments, the lender has the choice at their discretion to foreclose. They may not foreclose if you only miss the first payment, miss one payment. They may not even foreclose if you miss 6 payments, 6 months in a row. In 2008, 9, 10, there were people that lived in their houses without paying a house payment for a year or more because the lender just couldn't get around to all the people that were in trouble. People just benefited. I wouldn't like to live that life because you'd always be wondering, when is the foreclosure notice coming? Because when that foreclosure notice arrives in the mail, now the foreclosure process has begun. And you have this amount of time as an owner to make it right. How can you stop the foreclosure? By paying the lender everything you owe them, which is kind of laughable if it weren't so sad. It's like, well, if I could pay them everything I owe them, the full loan amount, I wouldn't have gotten in trouble and been behind in my payments to begin with, right? But maybe Uncle Joe, maybe the lottery comes in and somehow or other you pull money from air. That would stop the foreclosure. You could pay them. Now, since the foreclosure process began, now you've got to pay some penalties, right? In North Carolina, there's the borrower, the one borrowing the money is called the mortgagor. They're the one giving the promise to put up the house as collateral. The one benefiting from the mortgage is the beneficiary, and I need to correct that in my little explainer video from yesterday. I misspoke. I said it was the mortgagee. It's the beneficiary. The lender's the beneficiary, the borrower's the mortgagor, and there's a third party involved in North Carolina. It's a 3-party system. The title theory state of North Carolina handles it in the title theory method. And that's a 3-party system. There's the borrower, the lender, and the trustee. The trustee holds a version of the title until the entire mortgage is paid off. There I go again. Until the entire debt or loan is paid off, at which point the owner gets it. The owner, in the meantime, gets to use it. They are the owner. You know, there's an old joke. Do you own your house? No, the bank owns it. I just live here. Well, no, that's not true. You actually are the owner. It's just that you could lose it if you don't live up to your end of the bargain and make your payments on time. So this default process depends on the type of method, whether it's the lien theory or title theory method that is used in that particular state. The lien theory seems to be used a bit more in other states. So mortgages versus deeds of trust, same kind of document. Says, I pledge this property as collateral. But first is the promissory note. That outlines what you owe. And that is saying, look, this is legal evidence that there is debt between a borrower and a lender, between a borrower and a lender. What are some essential elements of a note? You need to tell how long it is for. So you don't have a lender just saying, oh, no, I know you thought it was only 5 years, but it's really 10. I'm changing it on you. They can't do that, right? The term of the note needs to be spelled out in the promissory note, the term of the loan, the duration. The promise needs to specifically say, I promise I will repay, in some sort of legal verbiage. And the borrower signs it. I promise I'll pay it. It's also negotiable. The word negotiable, what does it mean to say it's negotiable? Does it mean that you can haggle with them and say, well, you want 6% interest rate? I'll give you 5.5%. No. Negotiable just means that they can take that promissory note that you've signed, and now they have you locked in. You owe them, based on the proof, this legal evidence of this promissory note, they being the lender. Well, they're loaning it to you at this interest rate because you have really good credit. They're giving you a good rate, a low rate, because your credit is good. You've proven through your past history of borrowing that you are a good, easy credit risk, that you're solid. They're going to lump your loan in, your promissory note in, with hundreds, thousands of other people, borrowers with similar levels of risk, other borrowers with low risk, with good credit. By the way, there's also groups of promissory notes of borrowers with not so great credit. They lump them in based on their credit worthiness and their likelihood of repaying, because they're all of the same kind of caliber, same quality. They will lump them together, and they're going to sell them as a big package to another lender, a lender who's willing to wait over time, over those 15, 30 years, however long the mortgage notes are. Those lenders are happy to get that amount of money, that amount of interest they're making through all those payments over time. The first one who started the loan, they just want to go ahead and get a bunch of money today, because then they want to take today's money that they earned from that other lender that they sold all those loans to. They're going to take that chunk they just made and make more loans to more people for more interest. And it's just this ongoing cycle. That process of lumping them together in big chunks and selling them back and forth among lenders is called the secondary mortgage market. That's the secondary market. The primary market is the one where you walk in off the street to Bank of America and fill out a home loan application and start making your payments. That's the primary market, the street level, the application, the borrower, and the lender. But then when that lender takes them, carves them up, and sells them in big chunks, that's the secondary. Negotiable just means that the lender's allowed to sell the loan. Anybody own a house and anybody close on that house, and within the first week they send you notification, oh, don't make your payment to this original lender anymore, make it to this other place, because they've already sold the loan. The better the loan is, the more sellable it is, the more desirable it is, and the more likely it'll probably get sold. Some people will choose to get loans from like a bank. Some other times you might be a member of a credit union, which is always a good idea. Credit unions are usually they have a lot of nice benefits. But what I've found with the credit union loans, those mortgages, for lack of a better term, is that some people like them because they never sell them. Some credit unions don't sell the loan. They keep all the loans they make. So if you're worried about having to make your loan payment to a different entity while you have it, then try a credit union. They might be one of those that says, no, we don't sell our loans. We will never, doesn't matter if doesn't need to be negotiable because we're not going to sell it or transfer that to another person, another party. And these essential elements not recorded. Promissory note. There's some clauses in the promissory note. One of them is called the acceleration clause. This says if you miss a payment, the lender has the choice, if they want to call the entire balance due. It is because of the acceleration clause that they can foreclose. They're accelerating the full amount that you owe them, being due now instead of over the time that's remaining. Acceleration clause. Miss a payment. I shouldn't say skip, probably should say miss. That gives the point across a little better. That's your first step possibly to foreclosure. But again, the lender might not choose to start the foreclosure process just with one missed payment. They might go 2 or 3 or 4. It's up to them. They call the entire amount due now instead of giving you that full original time that you agreed to, because you dropped your end of the deal. There is such a thing, although it's not common. It's not for everyone. It's not for every loan, but there could be a prepayment penalty, meaning that you have to pay an extra amount of money, a penalty, if you pay the loan off early. That lender, the lender's loaning you the money because they want to make that interest over time. They want the long game, the benefit of the long term, making the interest over time. Therefore, if you pay them off in full early, that's a lot of interest that you're not going to end up having to pay them. And therefore, they might say, well, we're in this to get the interest. If you want to cheat us out of our interest by paying us off early, you're going to have to pay a penalty to make up for some of that interest that we're not going to end up being able to make. How might you pay this loan off early and therefore have to pay a prepayment penalty? By selling it, obviously, but also by refinancing. If you refinance with another bank, a different lender, maybe that whole, I want to go from an armed fixed to a fixed rate. If you refinance, thank you, Danita, I see you. If you refinance, that would constitute paying off that first lender early, and they might therefore charge you a prepayment penalty. They would have to tell you if there is a prepayment penalty before you obligate yourself and agree to that loan. They have to disclose, is there one? It's a required disclosure, obviously. It's not allowed if it's a primary residence loan of $150,000 or less. Those types of loans cannot have prepayment penalties built in. First purchase, $150,000 or less loan amount cannot have a prepayment penalty. Also, an FHA loan or a VA loan, neither of those types of loans can have a prepayment penalty. You're able to refinance, you're able to sell it and pay off the loan early without a penalty in those types of loans. And that 150,000 thing was the North Carolina rule. That's true for North Carolina. In what way? What do you mean by that? So, yeah. Right. I see. So I just Googled it. Is California a title theory or a lien theory state? And it says California is a lien theory state like South Carolina. So what that means is those lien theory states like South Carolina and California, when they choose to foreclose, they actually have to go to court and sue the borrower for foreclosure. and it takes longer. Anytime you're involving a court process, obviously it takes longer. In North Carolina, we use this 3-party title theory system using a deed of trust. When that borrower signs the deed of trust, they're saying up front, you can skip the court process. I'll go ahead and let you take my property from me if I don't live up to my end of the bargain. So there's that. As to sympathetic, I'm not sure. I guess it might depend on all kinds of things in those moments of devastation, financial upheaval. But that's what you need to know for this test is the difference between lien and title theory. And North Carolina streamlines the foreclosure process. The lender, again, can choose at what point to foreclose. But once they do decide to foreclose, they call up their trustee, which is probably an attorney that they've hired, and they say, go ahead and send them the foreclosure notice. They've been behind 3 months or however many months they decide is too many. We want to go ahead and start. That attorney will send you the foreclosure notice, and you'll be told, oh, if you want to save the foreclosure and stop it, you can pay the entire amount owed plus this penalty, because now you got to pay that attorney, trustee, because they're doing work. Now it's in foreclosure, pre-foreclosure. And that's the process. In the lien theory state, it takes longer to go through the lawsuit for foreclosure. Therefore, people could probably stay in their houses a little longer because it's going to take longer to make it through the system, especially the more and more that there are. I don't know if that comes across as being sympathetic to the borrower or not. The net effect is that they benefit, Okay. Another one is the alienation clause. And this is one of those where I would, in this course, I wish I could change words to be different letters. I don't like that there's acceleration clause and alienation because my mind just thinks, what's the difference? It's harder. When you see alienation clause, think due on sale. They say the word alienation because you are alienating yourself from the property. You're selling it. And if you choose to sell the property, then the lender wants their money. Wouldn't it be a great deal if you could be the borrower and you get a 30-year loan, and next year or sometime before you pay the whole thing off, you decide to sell the house. When you bought it, it was worth $300,000. It's now worth $400,000. You're making your payments of $1,200 a month, and you've always been on time. But let's go ahead and sell it. What'd I just say? $400,000. Let's sell it for $400,000 and not pay the lender the loan balance. Let's just keep making the $1,200 payment. Wouldn't that be nice? But the lender's not going to be cool with that deal. They're going to be like, wait, the collateral that you gave us is no longer in your possession. You sold it, and you're trying to still pay us this monthly, and you got this big chunk of $400,000 in your pocket. Not going to happen. Therefore, if you ever choose to sell it, then from the proceeds of your sale, you're going to have to pay us the loan balance that you owe us. That's what the due on sale clause is. Once you sell it, you got to pay us first. You got to pay us from the proceeds. If you're transferring the property, the alienation clause is built in, also known as the due on sale clause. The full amount owed is due on the sale. This also kicks in when you refinance, right? You got to pay them the full loan balance when you're refinancing into a different lender. They're calling the entire balance due now. Because you triggered this alienation clause, this due on sale clause, you triggered it by selling the property. Negotiable, we know what this is. We're giving them permission, they're letting you know, well, we're going to want to sell this loan maybe. And if we do, you're giving us permission up front in writing because it's a negotiable instrument. We're letting you know now. Negotiable meaning we can sell it in a lump, big chunk with others to other investors. They can't change the terms on you. Your payment won't change. Nothing regarding you and your loan will change. That's what they're selling to the other party, is your existing loan terms and price and everything like that. So here's the difference. The mortgage is something that we call it in a lien theory state. The deed of trust is what we call it in a title theory state. Call what? Call that promise to put the property up as collateral. That's what the mortgage does. That's what the deed of trust does. The mortgage side, the lien theory on the left, like California, like South Carolina, is what's called judicial foreclosure. It requires judicial foreclosure, meaning you got to go in before a judge. You got to go to court to foreclose on it. The lender does. Judicial foreclosure means the court is the process for foreclosure in a lien theory state like South Carolina. On the right, bottom of the page, North Carolina is a non-judicial foreclosure. You don't have to appear in court before the judge to get permission to foreclose. The borrower gave you that permission when they signed the deed of trust at purchase. Streamlined it. It's much quicker, much easier. If I were going to be a lender for mortgages, for deeds of trust, I'd rather be a lender for a deed of trust in North Carolina than a lender for mortgages in South Carolina, because if I had to foreclose, it wouldn't be as complicated. It wouldn't take me as long to finally get my money. And if I had to take the property back and sell it to get the money back, I could do it faster, more efficiently. When it's a two-party state, the borrower's the mortgagor, the lender's the mortgagee. When it's a three-party state, the borrower is the grantor, the lender is the beneficiary, and the trustee is the one who's holding that deed of trust until the loan is paid off, at which point the borrower gets, or I guess the grantor gets all the forms of deed. They get all the ownership of it. So basic mortgage terms, it includes a mortgage or a deed of trust includes two things, two instruments: a promissory note handling the terms of the money borrowed, and then the mortgage or deed of trust that says if you don't pay, you don't stay. If you don't pay, you don't stay. You don't get to keep the house because the house is collateral. So it's both of these things added together. It's what constitutes a mortgage or a deed of trust. There's a nice high-tech graphic. Lender, borrower, trustee. And if that borrower gets late, the lender chooses to foreclose, they reach out to the trustee and they say, start the process. The word hypothecation is the thing that's happening when you use a mortgage or a deed of trust. It's the process of putting up the property as collateral for the mortgage, for the loan. Pledging the property as security for the loan. That's hypothecation. One of those 5-syllable words. It's a good one to know. Hypothecation, pledging the property as collateral. Okay, we've talked about the promissory note. That's outlining the terms of the money that you're borrowing. Let's talk about the deed of trust. Shift into North Carolina here. It's a security of the debt. It's a pledging of the collateral from the borrower to the lender. You can take my property if I don't pay according to plan, to the promise. The essential elements of the note is the signature of the borrower. Obviously a legal, if we had to just sit here in a committee and say, let's start the process of deed of trust and let's make the rules. We're all going to get together as a committee right here in this room and make the rules. We'd probably come up with these 3 items. Well, probably should be in writing so it can be enforceable. Probably should just make sure we're clear on the property being bought, because let's not sell somebody's property that didn't want to sell it. And let's make sure the one borrowing and putting the property up as collateral is signing the borrower. Identity and signature of the borrower needs to be clear. And these things are recorded. The deed of trust is recorded. You can look it up. If your neighbor, if you're curious, are they a renter or do they own it? Go to the Register of Deeds in the county you're in, look up the address. You can see if there is a deed of trust on file. It'll show you all kinds of fun stuff. You can look up the deed and the deed of trust. Both of them are recorded, and those are 2 different things. Side note, you probably already figured that out. Don't get confused in a test question. Make sure your mind is nice and clear and calm. When you're reading the test question, if they say something about the deed, don't replace it in your mind with the word deed of trust. Those are 2 different things. The deed is the title. It's the thing that says who is the owner. The deed of trust is the instrument that pledges the property as collateral. You with me? It's easy to mix them up in the heat of the battle when your brain's tired. Deed of trust or deed? Which are they talking about in the question? Here are the common provisions. Acceleration is very common. If you're behind, if you miss a payment, they can accelerate and call the entire loan due now. Alienation is something that's in place so that if you choose to sell it or pay it off early, then they want all their money. If you want to refinance or sell it, you've got to pay them the entire loan balance due when you sell it. And then a prepayment penalty is not as common. It depends on the type of loan. Not allowed in FHA, not allowed in VA, not allowed for $150,000 principal loan amounts or less in North Carolina, but it could be in other types of loans. Be careful on refinancing. It's common. More predatory lenders who offer refinance deals might slide a prepayment penalty in there on you. So you got to be careful about that. Make sure you read the fine print. Let's see. The obligations of the borrower in a deed of trust is obviously to make their payments, but the lender knows that they're at a bit of risk, because let's think back to our lesson on lien priority. What is the number one entity, first position? What's the first thing that gets paid if people are not paying their bills and they're behind on everything? What's the first thing that gets paid? Property tax. The government could foreclose on the house and take the house because the taxes weren't paid for some amount of time. And how far down the list is the mortgage? They're not top of the list. That lender who is making it possible is further down the list. In fact, it's not even second position because that's special assessments by the government, right? So the lender wants to make sure that you keep your taxes paid and you keep it insured. If it burns down, that's their collateral that's burning down. Got to make sure an insurance policy is in place to have some value to work with in the event of a catastrophe. So the borrower has to make the payment on the loan, the principal and the interest payment. They also have to pay the taxes and the insurance. And quite often, the lender will let them pay the property taxes and insurance in increments. They don't have to pay the whole bill all at once. They can pay it over time. And they can even set it up so that they pay the lender and the lender pays the taxes and insurance. So you're paying a $1,200 payment, and it is what is called a PITI payment, P-I-T-I payment. The principal and interest is the let's say that's $1,000 just for borrowing the money and paying down your principal a little bit every month. The taxes, let's say the total tax bill is $4,800 for the year. How much is that per month? So that's going to be another $400. I did this backwards. We're gonna see what it adds up to. We know the principal and interest is $1,000. We know the taxes are $400 a month because it's $4,800 a year for the tax bill, and then we know the insurance is like another $100 a month. So what would be the full PITI payment with all this stuff added together? There's $1,500 for principal, interest, taxes, and insurance. And you'll make that payment to your lender, and your lender will set aside this $400 and stick it in an escrow account for later in the year when the time has arrived every year for the taxes to be paid, September 1st or after. The lender's also going to collect this $100 for the insurance and stick it in the escrow account so that when those insurance payments are due, they have the money from you to pay them. Setting up the escrow account is one of the things we're going to learn about in the closing chapter. I think it's the next chapter. I think it's 12. And we have to know what we're doing. That's one of the many things that the paralegal and the attorney do to set up the closing. Principal, interest, taxes, and insurance. The borrower also, sorry, one second. There we go. The borrower also has to maintain the property. They can't let it go to waste. They can't let it get trashed and lose value because of that. And if they want to make significant changes, alterations, they have to get permission from the lender because they're fiddling around with the lender's collateral. You know, I live on this house, this old 1970 brick tri-level on 5 acres. I used to live on 6 acres. I sold one of the acres but to a big project developer that wants to put townhouses and apartments in behind me because we're zoned industrial and they're zoned residential. They needed to get their main entrance road an outlet, a back way. So they're going to come out on my street with the back entrance, and that's why I sold them 1 acre. But at the time, I had a home loan, I had a mortgage or a deed of trust. And my lender would not let me sell that 1 acre without giving me permission to sell it because I would have been giving up, reducing their 6 acres and house of collateral down to 5 acres and house, right? So I had to wait a long time and get the lender, had to send an appraiser out, and we had to figure out what it's worth. And I didn't know if that lender was going to want me to give them some of the sale proceeds and knock down the loan amount in some amount because now the collateral is less. Maybe they want me to owe them less total. Long story short, they kept taking forever to decide. The appraisal that we had done turns out was the wrong kind. It was a residential appraisal. They found out, oh, wait, this is about a land sale. We want a commercial appraisal. And instead of it costing $500, it was going to be $2,000 from me to have to pay for this thing just to get my lender to maybe give me permission to sell 1 acre. And just so happened I've lived here long enough and had paid down the debt enough that the entire sale of that 1 acre could pay off my mortgage. And instead of the original plan, which was to me and my brother be able to share a big chunk of money and do stuff with it, other stuff, we had to just use all that money to pay off the loan. So we didn't get check. Poor me, right? I know you feel sorry for me. First world problems. I don't have a mortgage, boo-hoo. But still, right? Had to figure that out. Had to make, we saved the deal. Otherwise, and this was a commercial transaction, that buyer was getting so frustrated. This developer was threatening to sue me for specific performance. As I was waiting for this lender, I don't know how far that would have gotten because my reply was, I'm not failing to perform. I'm waiting for the lender to give me permission. You knew this lender existed from day one. But to avoid all that mess, I'm just like, you know what? Forget it. Forget you, lender. You just don't get any more of my interest money from here forward. I'll just pay you off now. You just cheated yourself of, I think I still owed maybe 10, 15 more years, right? Paid off the whole thing. Didn't have to get the appraisal. Don't have a house payment. Now, joke's on me because I'm in the city limits with 5 acres and my tax bill every year, $11,400. So I basically have a house payment in the form of a tax bill, but at least I don't have a house payment on top of it, right? So that alteration, selling that acre, I had to get permission from my lender. I was just lucky enough to be able to just get rid of the lender by paying the loan off. If you were to make a change to the house, though, right, significant house change, that affects the lender's collateral. You would need their permission. In a tenants by the entirety situation, married folks, married people, one of them signs the promissory note if maybe sometimes one of the spouses has a better credit situation than another. And it's just better to qualify under one of them than it is both of them because that other one's credit situation is terrible. So only one of them could sign the promissory note and they're on the loan, but both of them have to sign the deed of trust. The lender won't allow it unless both, even the one with terrible credit, they both, because they're married, tenants by the entirety situation, they both have to sign the deed of trust, even though only one can sign the promissory note. Basic terms again, lien theory state there's a borrower and a lender. Borrower's the mortgagor, lender's the mortgagee. The borrower is retaining both legal and equitable title. Legal title plus the equitable, meaning they get to possess it and use it. Lender holds the promissory note. That's not here. That is not North Carolina. That is South Carolina and other states, a lot of other states. and I don't know the other ones that do it our way, we do it this way. Title theory state, the borrower is holding the equitable title. They get to live there, use it. The trustee is holding the legal title, which they will give to the borrower upon the final payment, upon the entire balance being paid. The lender holds the promissory note, just like they do in the other kind. That's what we do here. Borrower has some rights. They have the right to enjoy it, quiet enjoyment, possess it, quiet enjoyment, which means they have the right to possess it, own it without worrying about somebody coming in, taking it from them. They also have the right to redeem or pay off the mortgage lien anytime prior to default by paying it in full. They have the right to pay it off. If they miss a payment or 2 or 5 and the lender decides to put them in foreclosure, they have the right to pay off the entire note and save the foreclosure from happening as well. That is all considered this defeasance word. The word defeasance means they can cancel the debt by paying it off. Defeasance, that's a good one. Need to know that one. The borrower has the right to redeem or pay off the loan anytime, whether it's a happy situation, non-foreclosure related, just because they want to pay it off, or they're in foreclosure and they're paying the full amount to stop the foreclosure. Because that foreclosure that's going to show up on their credit report for a long time and really hurt their score. So defeasance, think the right to defeat. The borrower has the right to defeat or pay off the mortgage, defeat the mortgage. These two words, equity of redemption, statutory. Let me show you. As our time winds down, hang in there, almost done today. Here we go. Hey, look, I made notes in my margins. Hopefully you're doing that. Even if it's something, again, that's in the body of the paragraph, this really helps you as you're flipping through what was that thing about defeasance? Oh, there it is. Instead of having to dig through all of the fine print, right? Instead of having to dig through the pre-printed stuff. So a couple things. There it is. Equity of redemption or right of redemption period. The borrower has the right to pay off the loan. They get the foreclosure notice. They can stop the foreclosure by paying the lender everything they owe them. It's also going to include some penalties, right? And they have an amount of time to do that. Then at some point, there's going to be a courthouse sale. They call it a sale on the courthouse steps. It's probably more of an electronic version of that now. And once we're at that point, they no longer have this equity of redemption period available to them. They've missed their opportunity. And most probably do miss their opportunity because who has the money? That's why they're in trouble already to begin with. After that foreclosure sale, the courthouse steps thing, that's called the statutory redemption period. And that's when we have something called an upset bid period. Somebody makes a bid, and then you have to give them 10 days for another bid to come in and beat it. And that bid has to be at least 5% more than the current one on the table. So you could go 9 days, and then there's someone who makes a higher bid, 5% or more higher. A new 10-day upset bid period starts ticking. Another 7, 8, 9 days, boom, new upset bid period. It can drag out for a bit. Eventually, the price that's on the table offered, it's going to start getting pretty close maybe to the market value, and those bids will stop coming in. People don't want to pay past a certain point because it might even also there might be a condition issue, might be in bad shape. Foreclosure sales are opportunities for buyers because you can get a better deal theoretically, but you do have to compete with other borrowers through this 10-day upset bid period. And you as a broker help a buyer through this maze, this process, and it's It's got its own challenges. You're submitting the bid on their behalf through the online system. You have to register as a agent who handles these things, and you have to be ready. Don't just sit around waiting for somebody to say, can you make an offer for me real quick on this foreclosure? Well, you need to do some stuff to be ready for them to take your bid, them being the government, through the system. So go ahead and knock that out while there's nobody looking over your shoulder wanting you to make an offer on their behalf. Go ahead and get approved, get all that squared away first. So that's on page 353. So look for that. There we go. So equity versus statutory redemption period. Statutory means the 10-day upset bid period is happening. Equity is the time during which the owner could still save it. We have a good bit to go, and this is a pretty big chapter. It's one of the last big chapters, though. So really give it some time. Here we go. Where are we at? Finance. Yeah, we're going to spend all the next time on it. And then what comes after that is chapter 12, section 12, which is about closing the transaction. But we have a lot of moving parts going on in this finance chapter. There's going to be math. Go over that math. I'd say come to class Monday with your questions ready. Ask me them along the way as well. I'm happy to post videos and give you answers along the way because there's a lot of stuff going on here. Things like calculating the annual interest, using a loan factor chart to figure out how much the monthly principal and interest will be based on the loan amount because of a chart. And in real life, no, you don't really use the chart, but all of those calculators that you use are basically based off of this chart, an algorithm that's using this same chart. At this percent interest for this many years, the payment is this much, kind of thing. So it does matter. So just let me know your questions. Other than that, I'll see you next week. Have a great weekend. Yes. Bye-bye. Yes. Oh, I know. I'm sorry for that. Gosh, that's frustrating. Gosh. Oh. Gosh. You too. I'll post it. It's actually on there now because I did a live stream. I haven't checked, but it should be up on YouTube. Okay. You're welcome. Bye. Hey. Okay. Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. That's good. That's smart. Yeah. Right. Right. Mm-hmm. Nice. Nice. That's a good idea. I'll use that. Perfect. Good. Right. Huge. Sure. Thank you. Thank you. Have a great weekend. Okay. Bye.